to the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, LBC understands ministers could be about to scrap plans to raise business rates for pubs. It's understood the U-turn will be announced within days after an outcry from the hospitality sector. Michelin-winning chef Tom Kerridge owns a number of pubs and restaurants. He joined Tom Swarbrick on Monday to outline how the trade was being affected, and he was back on the show this evening to celebrate the news.
That interview, and thank you so much, LBC, and yourself for that support that I think made a lot of noise. It was picked up by lots of other areas in the press, and I think the more people that paid attention and listened, and your support of pubs has been absolutely fantastic and phenomenal, and it really has helped to make a difference.
Cornwall and the Scilly Isles are under a red warning for strong winds, with warnings of a danger to life. A gust of 92 miles per hour has been recorded. Storm Goretti is moving in with amber warnings of snow for much of Wales and central England. Russia says any troops sent to Ukraine by the so-called Coalition of the Willing would be legitimate combat targets. It's after the UK and France announced plans to deploy forces there in the event of a ceasefire. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 3 points at 10,044. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather, Storm Goretti moving eastwards across southern parts of the UK tonight. Severe gale force winds in the far southwest and heavy snow for Wales and central England, a low of -5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Let's start tonight with a story that seems to be tearing America apart. As we have been relearning all week, the US, whatever you think of her imperial president, is our closest and our essential ally. So the ferocity of the political war inside that country matters to us as well. Let us begin with the facts. The shooting dead of a woman in Minneapolis by agents of ICE, the Immigration Enforcement Agency, has been called both cold-blooded murder and a vital strike against domestic terrorism. The woman, Renee Nicole Good, 37 years old, a mother, a poet and writer, was shot in the face multiple times while in her car observing an immigration raid. The video is freely available. Here is a recording of what happened, and advance warning, it is not pleasant.
No! No! Shame! Oh my God! What the What the You just what the did you do?
The Homeland Security Department called Good a domestic terrorist who had weaponized her vehicle and was trying to run over their officers. That's not how it looks to me. And in any case, the mayor of the city said the official explanation, backed by Donald Trump himself, wasn't true, and he sounded absolutely livid about what had happened.
There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis.
And looking at broadcasts and social media tonight, it seems as if all of America is angrily taking one side or another. It's a reminder of how fragile the politics of the nation are, below the level of presidential orders and international drama. Here is the governor of Minnesota and former vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, just before we came on air.
People in positions of power have already passed judgment. From the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem have stood and told you things that are verifiably false, verifiably inaccurate. They have determined the character of a 37-year-old mom that they didn't even know. This is a brazen use of force. They want us to bend the knee. They want us to capitulate. The way we give them what they want is allow them to use this as an excuse to put more troops on the ground.
Well, let's begin tonight with Simon Marks, LBC's Washington editor. Simon, it's no surprise, I suppose, but you can hear the fabric tearing.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. I think you're absolutely right to point out that the battle lines over this issue are hardening, and they really are hardening over a separation between truth and fiction. And the fiction is being promulgated by President Trump, who yesterday described that 37-year-old woman as a professional agitator. There is absolutely no evidence to support that contention. The fiction again was promulgated today by Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who insisted that this was an act of domestic terrorism, that she'd been using her vehicle as a weapon, that the ICE agent who fired that fatal shot, had every reason to believe that his life was in danger. None of that is supported by the video that we're seeing. And the more that the authorities in Minnesota and Governor Walz there said just within the last couple of minutes to ICE, leave my people alone, leave our state alone. Well, that's not going to happen. Kristi Noem says thousands more ICE agents are going to be deployed and surged into the state. The more that takes place, the further there is evidence to suggest that a federal cover-up of the investigation is underway, with the Minnesota authorities being told that they are going to play no role in the investigation. It's only going to be carried out by the FBI.
Well, that's very worrying. Let me ask you a little bit about Minnesota itself, because I guess many of us think of Minnesota as being essentially Germans and Swedes up in the snow, but it's got a very big recent migration population, and that is what Trump has been focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what began this latest surge of ICE agents onto the streets of Minnesota, and particularly Minneapolis-St. Paul, was President Trump's determination that Somalis, even those living legally in the state, needed to be detained and thrown out of America. He argued that half the 60,000 Somalis living legally in Minnesota had obtained their visas fraudulently. There is no evidence to support that claim whatsoever. Nonetheless, ICE agents have been creating terror on the streets of Minneapolis-St. Paul as they have sought to round up an increasing number of Somali migrants particularly. But remember, this is not isolated to Minnesota. ICE is operational all over the country. These masked, thuggish agents that we have seen deployed by President Trump to carry out his mass deportation and to sweep people off the streets without even knowing their own particular backgrounds. In some cases, US citizens, as Nicole Good may have feared that she was going to be detained by ICE, and as we've seen in the past, shoot first and then evade questions later.
Simon, I'm glad you said go beyond Minnesota, because as I understand it, this argument is now raging almost everywhere in the States. Certainly that's the impression you get from broadcast and social media, so-called. You have been covering America for a very long time. Do you feel that this is a particularly dangerous and fragile moment?
Oh, without question, Andrew. Absolutely without question. I mean, the president has in his big, beautiful spending bill $170 billion to fund ICE. He's talking about creating circumstances in which 1 million immigrants are seized and thrown out of the country every year. Earlier this week, he postulated the possibility that there might be circumstances where he would have to cancel America's midterm elections. This violence that we witnessed in Minneapolis yesterday, I mean, the only surprise is that it hadn't happened before and potentially in other places, because the more these efforts are made by ICE, operating often in direct contravention of laws that require them to identify themselves, to have a search warrant before they burst into people's homes, the more this goes on, the more febrile the situation will be created on the streets. And there is reason to believe that President Trump may not mind that as he looks for possible reasons to invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act and flood America's streets, particularly in Democrat-run states, with active duty military personnel.
Absolutely. Wow. So this is not one unfortunate, terrible incident. This is the beginning of a new reality across America.
Yeah, and there will be more very, very tragic incidents, Andrew. It is inevitable, given the way in which ICE and the Border Patrol agents have been behaving, not just in the last week, but for the last many months, as they have swelled their ranks, often with people who are receiving insufficient training. In many cases, their background checks are not completed by the time that they are deployed onto the streets. And they have the imprimatur of impunity from President Trump and from Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, basically to do pretty much whatever they want as the country begins to resemble a police state.
Americans have been divided, obviously, politically for a very long time now. But when you see, on the one side, sort of Republicans remembering the killing of Charlie Kirk and the kind of gleeful celebrations among some radical Democrats about that, and then you're seeing the other thing happening on this side, it's beginning to feel that the divisions in America are going to be impossible to heal.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're insurmountable. I mean, this has been such a polarized society for so long, and it's the polarization that you can trace, back over the last 15 years, 20 years that directly led to Donald Trump creating his Make America Great Again movement, moving to the right and not believing that it was even admirable to try and govern from the center. And so in this polarized environment, I think there are real challenges now. We've seen some clashes today between protesters and federal agents on the streets of Minneapolis. But, conversely, Andrew, one can argue it is pretty stunning that there aren't hundreds, if not thousands of people descending on the White House today protesting over what took place yesterday. The country becomes more febrile, more brittle with each passing day. And yet, on the other side of the aisle from President Trump, still a shocking absence of leadership, with the exception in the last 24 hours of men like Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, and Governor Walz.
What a day, ending what a week. Thank you very, very much indeed, Simon. A doleful conversation, but a very important one. Now let's hear from the 47th mayor of Minneapolis, who was in post from 2014 to 2018, Betsy Hodges. Betsy, thank you very much indeed for joining LBC tonight. And let's just start by asking you for your reaction to what happened in your city.
Well, my first reaction is the tragedy of it, and my heart goes out to the victim and her family and her whole community, and of course Minneapolis and Minnesota, who have been through a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. So my first reaction is the tragedy of it. My second reaction, of course, is I understand the temptation to debate whether or not it was a legitimate shoot. And of course it was not. But part of authoritarian playbook is to have us debate things that we can see with our own eyes and question what we can see with our very own eyes and debate whether or not that's actually reality. Getting people topsy-turvy is part of the playbook of authoritarianism. Part of Trump's playbook.
Do you believe that Nicole Good was trying to drive away when she was killed?
That would be my assumption, given anything that I know.
But I don't.
And what really needs to happen, and if I were one of the leaders, and this is, of course, what the governor has been pointing out and calling for, is what you need is some kind of investigation, somebody to actually ask the question before answering the question. I'm no longer in positional power in Minneapolis, so I can have an opinion and tell you what it is. But up to make decisions, they need information.
We were just hearing just now from our Washington editor, Simon Marks, that investigating this incident is being taken away from Minneapolis and Minnesota and handed to effectively the federal government. How concerned are you about that? Do you also think there's a danger of there being a cover-up?
I think there is a cover-up. I don't think we're in danger of it. I think that's exactly what's happening. The Trump administration is adept at covering up anything it doesn't like or anything it doesn't want us to know about. The American people are adept at sniffing that out, and so that's part of the reason there's been so much tension. But even debating the investigation of this incident, we run the danger of legitimizing the fact that ICE was there at all. You sort of, by debating, was this a good thing to do or a bad thing to do or what happened, actually legitimizes the fact that ICE is there at all. Bringing a gun to a policy fight is perverse and it is civically corrosive. And it is exactly what the Trump administration is doing around immigration. They're just, it's part of their larger plan of how they want to run and rule and dictate the country. But it is perverse and it is civically corrosive.
So President Trump has been alleging that Minnesota is home to a very large illegal population of people from Somalia. It's extremely dangerous. What is the actual situation in your state, in your city?
In Minneapolis, when I was mayor, one of the prides of Minneapolis is that Minneapolis has the largest Somali population outside of Mogadishu, that for many, many years we've taken in refugees and immigrants from Somalia, and they have been building and revitalizing our community for a generation or more at this point. And so they are a strength and a pride of Minnesota and of Minneapolis. They are not a problem for Minnesota and Minneapolis. In as much as every community has challenges and people who are creating problems. That's true in every community. To sort of pull that out of the Somali community and say they're a problem. Well, again, that's just part of an authoritarian playbook designed to separate people from one another for no good reason.
Betsy Hodges, thanks very much indeed for talking to me tonight. Up next, the latest government U-turn that could save one of this country's finest institutions, the Great British Pub. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time is now 6:15.
This is LBC. Night with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:17. Do you want a government that actually listens and corrects its mistakes, or do you want to mock it when it does so for humiliating U-turns? Well, you can take your pick, because yesterday I challenged the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, about the condition of Britain's pubs and the impact of her new drink and drive message on their profits, and she stood her ground. But LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, broke a cracking story this afternoon, and she is with me now. And the cracking story is that the Treasury
is thinking about another U-turn, Andrew, and this time on pubs. So obviously we had the U-turn just before Christmas on the farming taxes and the inheritance tax. We've obviously had the welfare U-turn, we've had the winter fuel U-turn, and now it's on business rates, which I'm told the Treasury is now looking at. I'm told that the Chancellor commissioned research on extra support for pubs before Christmas. So this has been a U-turn potentially in the working for a few weeks now. And we've heard from Labour MPs, we've heard from businesses, including Tom Kerridge speaking to LBC's Tom Swarbrick and other programmes about really the impact that these business rate changes are going to have on them. We know that from April, the Chancellor is expected to change those business rates. So the COVID relief is being tapered away, and there's been a re-evaluation of the business rates, essentially how much those properties are worth. So they're basically their prices and their taxes are going to go up. Now the Treasury has heard about the dire impact, however that's going to have. Some people are saying that their rates are going to be going up by literally tens of of thousands of pounds, sometimes
and
100%.
that would wipe out. And we've seen the numbers of pubs in the UK going down and down and down over the past
One
decade.
every week are closing. It's absolutely crazy figures. And the Chancellor clearly is very worried, and she said that she is listening. I'm told that a specific pubs package is expected as soon as next week. What's happening next week, Andrew? Of course, the finance bill is back in the House of Commons. Those crucial votes on the budget and exactly what that will mean for the future of the Prime Minister, for the future of the Chancellor, will become very clear. So it's very clear to me that speaking to those Labour MPs, the Treasury just felt that there was not enough support there for it, and they really wanted to make sure that they got everybody behind them. So therefore I felt that there was no choice but to U-turn.
Fascinating. A bit of penitence, a bit of political thinking from the Treasury. Stonking scoop, Natasha. Congratulations. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the government's rolling out its legislation to abolish the two-child cap on welfare benefits, intended to lift more than 500,000 children out of poverty. Nigel Farage says he'd vote against it because, quotes, it would benefit huge numbers of foreign-born people. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has responded by accusing him of racism, saying, does Nigel Farage want to go around and say, white? Yeah, you can have the money. Black? No, I'm sorry, it's not for you. What sort of country does he think we are? Well, let's hear next from Diana Johnson, the Minister for Employment. I put to her that lifting this cap is popular in the Labour Party, but not with the public. Why?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think dealing with child poverty...
I'm sorry, 60% of people are against removing the cap.
I think people recognise that children should not be held to account for choices that they've not made. And actually, what we know as taxpayers is that if you don't deal with child poverty, as taxpayers, we will be paying the bill for child poverty for many, many years to come. Those children don't do as well at school. They won't earn as much. They'll often perhaps go on benefits. Their health won't be as good. And when you know that it's 4 times more likely that a child in poverty will have mental health issues, that then feeds into the fact we've got all these young people who are not in education, employment and training through sickness and disabilities. And we need to deal with that.
I don't disagree with any of that. I'm trying to understand why so many people in the country don't agree with this policy. Let me put it to you that a lot of people feel, I'm a taxpayer, I put my money in, why should I be subsidising people who choose to have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 children but don't have the money to pay for it?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognise that 50% of families that will benefit from the two-child limit being withdrawn, they weren't claiming universal credit at the time they had children. People's lives change in an instant sometimes. Parents can die, have a terrible accident, be made redundant, they end up on benefits. So I think that's worth actually reflecting on. Secondly, the previous government brought this policy in because they said it would change behaviour. There's no evidence at all that this policy has changed behaviour. And you're talking about large families. The evidence is that it's about 4% of families have more than 5 children. So we're talking about families that 2, 3 children, perhaps 4. That's what we're talking about.
The latest political development in all of this is Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform, saying that his party will vote against this because there's a danger that it involves too many people from overseas communities. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has basically called him out for racism. Do you agree with that?
Well, he's wrong, because I know
but do you think that is a racist argument?
If I can just explain, 9 out of 10 of the families that will be affected by this change have a parent born in the United Kingdom. So the vast majority of the families that will actually benefit have a UK-born parent. I think that's really important. I think for Nigel Farage is obviously putting forward policies for whatever reason he wants to do that. I want to make sure that any child in this country has the opportunities and the chances that we would all want for our own children. And at the moment, the fact that 900,000 more children went into poverty from 2010 to 2024 is shocking. And I really think the British public do not want to see children living in poverty.
Now, we know that public finances are very tight at the moment. Are you absolutely convinced you have the money to fund this project?
Yes, we do. And clearly in the budget last November, the Chancellor announced made this announcement. The welfare budget, we're already seeing changes to that in terms of we've taken action on Motability to reduce the costs of that. We've got a big fraud and error programme to reduce the costs there. We've got the gambling, the arrangements around gambling tax that were brought in by Rachel
enough
Reeves.
money is coming in.
So money is coming in to help pay for this.
Let me ask you about the other big political story of the day, which is a U-turn by the Treasury to help pubs. Now, obviously, it's welcome if ministers listen to complaints being made about policies, but there seems to be something wrong in the Treasury. Its political instincts seem to have been pretty bad for a while, and U-turn after U-turn after U-turn.
Well, I think, again, going back to the budget, the Chancellor announced the change to business rates, which I think was a good announcement in terms of making it fairer for smaller businesses. But alongside that, we had the fact that the previous re-evaluation around business rates had happened during COVID, and we know that profits were down then, and that had an effect on the re-evaluation. And the other point is, of course, that some of the help and support that was put in around COVID, that's coming to an end. So I think her policy was right, and money was made available to try and smooth the way for the other two factors that I've identified.
So what went wrong? I mean, something went wrong.
But what's happened now is that the pub sector have come forward with more information to make their case to ministers. And I think it's right that ministers listen. If a pub landlord or a trade organisation comes forward and says, we understand what your policy wants to do, but this is actually something you need to be aware of. I think that's right. We look at it.
I think everybody would like the government to listen. No one's arguing against that. But there is a sense that the information coming into government, the information coming into the Treasury has just been a bit duff.
Well, I'm not a Treasury Minister, so I'm not party to what information they have or not. Obviously, we have some of the brightest brains in the Treasury.
Always worries me when people say that.
And what I do know is that, and the Prime Minister, I think, has been clear on this, if the policy announcements aren't working, if they're not going to deliver what we want, which is a better start for everybody in this country and good opportunities, then we've got to look again. And I think, before Christmas, those conversations were already underway with the pub sector to get that package of support to help them, because we all want pubs to do well, don't we? We want them to thrive.
Of course we do.
I want people to be employed in them. I want people to feel that's a local pub they can go into and have a drink on a Friday night.
Pubs are our little local parliaments, as I think Nigel Farage has said. We all want that. But are we going to see U-turn after U-turn after U-turn now? Is this a government which has, in a sense, lost its political confidence?
No, I don't think we've lost our political confidence. I mean, I'm here today announcing, the passage through Parliament of the 2-child limit being removed. I think that's a very positive thing to do. It fits with the broader child poverty strategy we announced in December. I think that's all good. This week we've had the Prime Minister on the world stage again, delivering for the security of this country. So I don't think we've lost our confidence.
One further issue, which is that quite a lot of Labour MPs looking at the ability of Grok, which is the AI part of the whole Elon Musk empire, being used to nudify and create online pornography, including pornography involving children, say that this is the moment for Labour MPs and, frankly, the Labour government to come off X. Do you agree?
Well, I am appalled by what's happened, and let's be clear: it's not child pornography. This is actually child abuse. This is child abuse images that are being put forward. And I know that Peter Kyle and ministers in the department and Liz Kendall in DC, I know they will be having those conversations, very strong conversations with the bodies like Elon Musk run.
Simply, shouldn't you all come off X now?
Well, I know actually a number of my colleagues have already done that. They've already chosen to do that.
But you yourself?
Actually, well, I am on there, but I am reflecting now about staying on there as well. And I've been on for a long time, since I think about 2009 when it was Twitter. So I'm reflecting as well, because I absolutely think it's appalling what's happened.
All right, Diana Johnson, thank you very much for coming in and talking to LBC.
Thank you.
Now, I was asking there about the ongoing row over Grok, the Elon Musk AI tool, which is being used to strip or nudify adults and create child pornography. It sits, obviously, on X, which was previously Twitter. So should Labour politicians start to come off that platform? Let's talk now to the former Transport Secretary, Louise Hay. Lou, great to have you on the show at last. What do you think? Should everyone come off X at this point?
Well, hi, Andrew. I stopped looking at Twitter nearly 2 years ago now. It hit really rock bottom for me after the Musk takeover. But to be honest, even prior to that, it had already descended into a really depressing and quite violent place at times. But I've maintained a presence over the last 18 months or so because the critical mass of the government and politicians and most of the lobby journalists in Westminster are still very much present there. And that's where a lot of the political discourse happens. But I have to say, the revelations over the last few days of Grok, as Diana Johnson has just said there, essentially committing child abuse, are the absolute last straw. And I think it is unconscionable for me personally to remain on Twitter another minute longer. So I've disabled my account today. And I do think it's time for the government to come off Twitter entirely. I don't believe it's where the vast majority of the public, even the online public, conduct themselves. Most of my constituents are on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram and increasingly Blue Sky. The discourse on Twitter is violent at times, vile, and now really crossed the Rubicon. So I don't see a justification for remaining on that platform.
So this is a moment for action, not just words. I guess the defence, if there was one, is if I kind of ventriloquise Elon Musk, which is unlikely, I concede. But if I try to do that, I would say, I suppose, that they have created a tool, a machine, and therefore they shouldn't be responsible for everything that people use that machine or that tool for.
Well, as some of the absolute vanguards of AI have said themselves, there have to be guardrails around this technology. You cannot put that out into the world at the behest and the ability of any user that wants to create content with it, especially that which so brazenly breaks the law and puts children in harm's way. We're trying to legislate in a completely analog way for an increasingly for a world that is increasingly far beyond our ability in Parliament and government regulation, and we need to keep up with that. But free speech has its limits when it causes harm, and these tools that are put out into the world have to have guardrails around them to prevent harm doing, especially as a first principle when it comes to children.
So you are clear the whole government should come off Twitter now. What about the argument that other people will be using it and the government will find it harder to communicate with voters?
Well, as I say, I don't believe the vast majority of voters are on Twitter. I think, they're far more likely to use platforms like Facebook. I actually, and I've written about this earlier today, I made the argument internally several years ago for us to come off Twitter, well before Elon Musk took it over, because I saw how it was affecting the discourse, not just online, but offline as well. I believe it affects how politicians behave to each other and how we behave online. And when we're performing on television or in debates, I think it's far too easy to perform for the clip that you're likely to generate on Twitter and then see the engagement click up afterwards rather than actually engage with the audience that's in front of you. So I think it's had a really harmful impact on our political discourse over the last 10 years or so, even before the Musk takeover and now these horrific revelations. But I think today is the absolute straw that breaks the camel's back, and I think we should all look to come off that platform.
It's never been very good at nuance or perspective. Louise Hay, thank you very much indeed for talking to me today. Another Russian tanker has been spotted in the English Channel. What, if anything, are we going to do about that? And how risky is it for us to respond? We'll discuss that, but the time now is 6:32, and Tim Humphrey has your news headlines.
LBC understands the government will announce a U-turn next week over a rise in business rates for pubs. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has welcomed it, but told us she wants to see a reduction in VAT for the sector as well. Gusts of 98 miles per hour have been recorded on the Isles of Scilly, which along with Cornwall are under a red warning for wind. Storm Goretti will also bring heavy snowfalls to Wales, the Midlands and South Yorkshire. A former Premier League referee who had a sexual video of a 15-year-old in his school uniform on his laptop has been given a suspended sentence. David Coote had previously admitted making an indecent image of a child. LBC weather, Storm Goretti moves eastwards across the southern parts of the UK tonight. Severe gale force winds for the far southwest and heavy snow for Wales and central England. A low of -5 degrees.
This is LBC.
I love visiting Mum and Dad.
Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. Now, we were talking just a few moments ago to the former Transport Secretary, Louise Hay, who is calling on the government to boycott X. Well, let's get a bit more on that story now from our political correspondent, Aggie Shornbury, because Aggie, she's not alone.
She is not alone, Andrew. I've been speaking to Labour MPs, senior Labour MPs, ministers too, all day who agree with Louise Hay. Not just that this is outrageous. Indeed, Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State partly in charge of this, I understand she is apoplectic. So there's huge rage in government about this. But there is also lots of Labour MPs who agree with Louise Hay that actually the government needs to combat this by coming off X altogether. Now, speaking to people in government, I don't think that's going to happen. So they basically don't want to be bullied off, what they would say is bullied off a public space. They think it's up to Musk to clean it up. But we have also heard from the Prime Minister today saying X has to get a grip of this and nothing is off the table. And I have been told by people in government that we are going to hear more of this in coming days. But there are MPs I spoke to today who basically said it just does not feel like a safe space for me. I have got a statement, Andrew, from X. They say we take action against illegal content on X, including child sexual abuse material. Anyone using or prompting Grok to make illegal content will suffer the same consequences as if they upload illegal content.
Wow, a very, very important moment. Let's see how brave they are taking on this big American ally of Donald Trump. It'll be very interesting. Aggie, thanks so much for that. Now then, after the audacious seizure of a shadow sanctions-busting oil tanker in the Atlantic, another apparent member of the Russian shadow oil fleet is in the Channel. And the obvious question is, what, if anything, are we going to do about that? And the second obvious question is, will the Russians retaliate, potentially even against British shipping? The former Director General of Russi, Michael Clark, is with me now. Michael, great to have you on the show. I guess the really big question people all around the country will be thinking about is, how far does this go? If we are grabbing shadow Russian tankers and they start to operate against us, is there a danger of a general conflict on the high seas?
Yes, there is. I mean, the government, Western governments in general, faced this issue years ago with Iranian shadow tankers, 20-odd years ago. And the thought then is, well, why don't we just seize them? Why don't we arrest them? They're clearly illegal, bring them into a port, send the crew home, impound the cargo. And if there is legal challenges to what we've done, fine, we'll have 5 years of legal challenges and the ship owners will know they've lost their ship, at least for 5 years and maybe forever. That was the thought then, but also the counter thought was, well, if we start doing that, the Iranians will seize ships. They'll seize other ships. They'll hold our ships hostage. And that same argument applies now, that as we're getting more muscular about the dark fleet, the shadow fleet, and that there is this willingness now in Western governments to get tough on them because it's become an outrage in lots of ways, not just that, but the ships that are cutting cables and cutting or look as if they're interfering with pipelines, and the Yantar, this Russian ship that hangs around our waters, the waters of Western Europe, and is up to no good. You know, why don't we just get tough with them and pull them in? But the fact is, yes, we can. Yes, we probably should. There will be retaliation. And so you have to be careful in terms of the vulnerabilities that our shipping might have to the Russians taking reciprocal action on some spurious grounds.
Very, very hard for us here to gauge what different Russian politicians are saying and whether they're really serious. But there have been Russian parliamentarians, for instance, over the last 12 hours or so, suggesting torpedoing American patrol boats and going after British ships as well. But I guess, in a sense, the likelier and bigger danger is simply destroying some of the cables on which we rely so heavily.
Yes. I mean, the Russians have spent some years tracking all of those cables, and we now have some facilities to check on what they're doing and go and have a look at the cables ourselves and make sure they're okay. The cables aren't such a problem in themselves because internet cables have lots of redundancy. So if you lose some cables, you can just reroute things around others. Even so, some of the Nordic nations find that they are dependent on only 3 or 4 main cables, and so they can't reroute things around. The bigger issue actually is pipelines, because if pipelines are destroyed, they have to be repaired, and that's extremely difficult if they're on the seabed, say in the North Sea or even in the Channel or anywhere else. So these are vulnerabilities. We've known about them for a long time, but we're heading inexorably towards some sort of militarized incident with the Russians in the next few years. I've always thought that when those incidents start to occur, they're more likely to occur at sea rather than in the air or on land. And I think we're probably moving in that direction now. But the argument for not doing anything is that the more we fail to take action, the more the Russians will do it, because the shadow fleet is now anything between 400 ships and 1,400 ships strong. And this shadow fleet is now global. Yeah. And many ships are legal, and then they go into the shadow fleet and they operate illegally for a while, and then they go legal again. And it's very difficult to track them. However, AI and the International Maritime Organization based in London has been doing some good work on this, and so has our own Ministry of Defence. Using AI, it's now possible to be much more certain than even a couple of years ago as to who is a shadow fleet ship and what isn't.
Well, that's the real... we don't know, but I would imagine right now there are discussions going on in the Admiralty about what to do about this ship bobbing along the channel, which is clearly, it's changed its name many times, it's changed its flag, it's clearly dodgy. But are we in the situation now of picking out those ships and doing something about them?
We are on the well, we started to do that a little bit with some of the ships in the Baltic that have been cutting cable. Let's say we, the Western countries. The operation that took place 36 hours now ago against the Marinera, this Bella 1 that the Americans boarded, that was to do with Venezuela. And although it was a Russian ship, it had been given Russian nationality in the middle of its voyage, so it upsets the Russians. But actually, that was the Americans reacting to Venezuela, which we are keeping quiet about for all sorts of reasons. The issue about these ships in the Channel is that they pass through the Channel all the time, and sometimes the Russians escort them with their frigates, making it clear that any attempt to intercept them will be a serious maritime incident. But we're on track to actually try to manage one of those incidents. Whether we'll do it this time, I rather doubt. But having said that, the Americans have still got an awful lot of air power based in Britain as a result of the operation of 48 hours ago. They've got all the stuff here. If they choose to do it again against another ship, they might. We are ourselves in Britain, we'd find it more challenging to do it ourselves. Not impossible. But if we did, the Russians certainly would retaliate in some way.
Well, we're all on tenterhooks about that. Michael Clarke, thank you very much for talking to me tonight. Now, it's been a week when the very future of NATO has been under threat. Tonight, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is talking to his Danish counterpart about American ambitions to grab Greenland. And the French President Macron warned today in the Elysée that Washington was turning its back on its European allies. Let's talk now to Jim Townsend, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO under President Obama. Jim, great to have you on the show. What's your reflection, first of all, on the condition or the state of NATO? Is it beginning to come apart?
It's a great question. I don't think NATO itself right now is coming apart, but it could break into 1,000 pieces if the U.S. puts troops into Greenland and we're starting to see gunfire between the Danes and the U.S. That would absolutely destroy the alliance because the alliance is built on trust between all of us. And if that trust goes away, the alliance foundation crumbles. So that would be what's destroying. That would be what would destroy NATO. Today, it's under a lot of pressure because of the U.S., particularly distancing itself in a lot of different ways. And I think the discussion about the tanker really was an example of that. The very good discussion you just had. Back in the day, the U.S. would have been there helping the U.K. deal with this. The U.S. would be a backstop to the U.K. It would be something we'd handle together. And yet, I don't think we are. I haven't heard that we are in there with you, but I think it feels like the U.K. is by itself, having to deal with a squabble with the Russians. So that kind of thing hurts not just the bilateral relationship, but also it weakens NATO.
And I guess behind all of that, NATO is really a question of trust and confidence. In other words, would the American president, in the end, use Article 5 and defend a NATO country under attack? And with this president, I think none of us on this side of the Atlantic are sure that's the case.
Well, and that's the same on this side of the Atlantic as well. I hate to say that, but you're right about the confidence. Trust brings confidence, and we've got to have confidence in each other, that we have each other's back. And that Article 5 means, we all come to the aid of a country under pressure. And if there's doubt that the leader of the alliance might take another tack, then Article 5 is undercut. So this is a time of NATO feeling quite uncertain about things, which can only rebound in the favor of the Russians.
So here's the hardest question of all. What should we, on the Western side, the European side of NATO, do in response to this? Because our Prime Minister, for instance, is very, very cautious about what he says about President Trump. He's clearly trying to play nice, bide his time, and hope that things change. Is that the best strategy?
Well, I'm trying to keep Trump alongside, being nice, currying favor, as distasteful as that is. I think the nations in Europe are doing a good job of doing that. But what can't be done is biding time and hoping for the best. I think European nations have got to just redouble their efforts just concerning defense. And I know it's hard in the UK. I know the politics and I know the budgets. But this tanker example is the perfect one where if UK can't depend that the United States will back them up, is the UK strong enough, confident enough with the military resources to handle that tanker issue without fear of the Russians and being able to deter the Russians from doing something? That's what's critical. So whether it's the UK or other European nations, what must be done is breaking dependency on the US for defense and strengthening the ability of each European nation, not just to contribute to NATO, but to take care of their own defense. That just has to happen. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take money. But but to find yourself in a situation like the UK is right now, wondering what to do about that tanker is a great illustration of a problem you don't want to have.
So if you're addressing, as it were, British voters through this programme who are scratching their chins and thinking, actually, I'd like a bit more spending on education or potholes or universities or whatever it might be, your advice would be, no, all the money that's spare, all the money that you can accumulate must go to defence.
It's a hard question and a hard thing to say. But number one, in the U.S., we want that too. Education, healthcare, potholes, all of those things that we don't have. We put money into defense, but the situation is with the UK is different in the sense that UK history has shown so many times the UK having a weak defense and then having to just hurry and to scramble to rebuild defense to handle whether it's Hitler or whether it's the Kaiser or the Cold War. UK has a habit of this. A lot of nations do. Democracies have a hard time spending money on things like defense when you've got civilian requirements. But what I would beg the UK taxpayer is to say this. This is a time I have worked this issues. I've worked in the Pentagon for 35 years. I have worked with the UK for almost that long on defense. I'm not just bullshitting here. This is a time not just for the UK, but for Europe. But just talking to the UK now, more money has got to be put in defense. And I know the sacrifice. I know, but it will be much more expensive to find yourself at the mercy of Russia or at the mercy of anyone who's stronger than you when problems come up and you are trapped because you're not strong enough to defend yourself and you fall under their sway. I think we're going to see a time in the coming years where if things don't change, Russia could be dominant in Europe. Russia has something against the UK. I don't know what it is, but they have picked on the UK now for 15 years. They
certainly don't like us very much. I can hear the passion in your voice, Jim. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight. That's a really, really important message there to end on. Now, it has been a historic week, as we've just been hearing, for the West and, frankly, for the whole world. We're going to pick it through it all with my political panel next, but the time now, 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Iain Dale.
At 9, putting on weight after giving up fat jabs. At 8, an LBC present a special edition of Cross Question. But first, Putin threatens Britain over peacekeepers in Ukraine.
Iain Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Rotimi.
Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
It's 6:51. So we start the year focused on world affairs with government U-turns and Westminster in a jittery mood. Let's hear more from my Thursday panel this week, comprising those digital sleuths, Dan Bloom of Politico and Zoe Grunwald of The Lead. Welcome to you both. I guess the question for both of you, let's start with you, Dan, and then you, Zoe, is we've had a passionate plea there from America for us to spend still more on defence. We read this, a £27 billion new black hole in the MOD budget. What are the real chances of Keir Starmer taking painful decisions to do that?
Well, I would say a high chance of him trying to take the decision to do it and to get to that 3.5% of GDP on defence. But the mere fact of the delay to the defence investment plan, which we're still waiting for, was due before Christmas and is kind of now, will it come in the few weeks coming, is a symptom of the fact that there just isn't enough money to go around, and meeting such a very, very high spending target is just, a stuff of Whitehall impossibility. So rubber's hitting the road.
Zoe, I kind of feel if they were going to make a real change, we'd have a big speech from the Prime Minister saying, do you know what, guys, the world has changed. There are really painful, horrible decisions to take so that we can defend ourselves properly. And I don't hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this should have been done a while ago, actually, because everybody knows that the international order is changing very, very rapidly beyond our control. Our alliances are shifting in ways that even a couple of years ago we couldn't have predicted. But also, we know that when this government came into office, they did this whole thing of it's just so much worse than we thought, the state of the public finances, the state of public services, wrap it all into one and say, do you know what? We need an emergency budget. We need emergency tax rises. We need to secure this country domestically and internationally. We need a healthy population, and we need to shore up our armed forces.
But instead, they have been very orthodox, very old Treasury in the way they approach these things, very tentative. And today we see, interestingly, reports of another U-turn coming, this time to help pubs. Now, the Daily Telegraph has been running a big campaign to save the British pub. A lot of publicans are genuinely very, very worried, and we're losing pubs at the rate of one a day. But is this evidence, do you think, either of you, that finally the Treasury is thinking more politically?
I think it's been forced to think more politically. From what I hear, this was a mixture of the industry doing what the industry does and being very vocal, and Labour MPs and indeed other MPs who wrote to Rachel Reeves before Christmas and were pushing this point. And I heard they were due to do something kind of legislatively that was pulled back because of some of the briefing that has come out today. So, the Treasury is thinking quicker, certainly, because this is way, way quicker than the kind of months and months for the farm tax U-turn, or indeed a whole load of others. But it's still being kind of pushed and forced to do that. And it's exactly because of those hard choices that you're talking about. Like, we've already had the emergency tax rises budget, and it's had to pay for other things. So, the Treasury is in an impossible situation here and has to make choices about it.
I think that's true. Zoe, to what extent do you think it's because Labour MPs amble along the high street and try and get into their local boozer and told they're not welcome?
Well, I think that's absolutely part of it. I think it's not just this campaign to keep Labour MPs out of pubs, but it's also constituents coming to their MPs and saying, all my community spaces are shutting down. There's no youth clubs, there's no pubs, the parks are in disrepute. And this becomes the kind of physical manifestation of what people see as broken Britain, when all these services and all these things that used to encourage community disappear. What people feel is this sort of miserablist politics. And, the Labour Party used to be the party of community and pubs and people going and talking to their neighbour. And I think it kind of needs to rediscover its roots a little bit there.
And instead, right now, the man who speaks up for the British pub seems to be Nigel Farage, I guess because he spends more time there than any other politician we can think about.
I was at his press conference yesterday where he said every pub is a parliament.
Yes, I heard that too. That's quite a good phrase, I thought.
Yeah. He reeled off a series of views he hears in pubs, most of which agreed with him, but even so.
Yeah. But what I see now is there's the government, in the shape of Rachel Reeves, actually, trying to pick a fight with Nigel Farage over the two-child benefit cap, because we know that I think it's about 60% of voters are not in favour of lifting the cap. And Nigel Farage says he would vote against it because of the number of foreign-born people who would get extra welfare payments as a result. Rachel Reeves says that shows you're a racist. Now, does this show, finally, the Labour Party, squaring up to Farage, squaring up to reform in a more aggressive way than we've seen?
Yes, as my colleagues on Politico have reported, this is a deliberate comms strategy by the government to be more fighty and to just be more out on the front foot and aggressive. The one problem is that until a few weeks ago, the government wasn't going to lift that two-child benefit cap at all. So
yeah. But we're seeing this in Prime Minister's questions. I mean, again and again and again, Keir Starmer starts Prime Minister's questions with a little jibe at Nigel Farage or a little jibe at reform.
Yeah, he did. I mean, there was the joke about Christmas in Russia, right? Or
That's
New
right.
Year in Russia,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And he always has a backbench Labour MP stand up and ask a very pointed question about Nigel Farage reform as well. But I think what the Labour Party and what the leadership are hopefully starting to realise is actually the biggest challenge to them is not losing voters to reform in their masses. It's losing those voters on the left who are going to go to the Lib Dems and to the Greens. And that is where, in those kind of marginal seats, there's going to be a lot of difficulty. So they need to hammer home on this message that we are distinctly different from reform. We're going to stand up for minorities and keep our progressive roots.
But it seems to me that is not the way that Keir Starmer himself is yet thinking. In other words, he is still pursuing this policy of it's going to be an existential fight at the next election between reform, and if they win, it's all over, and us, as it were, standing for traditional politics. And that is the way he is still trying to frame British politics, and that'll be the case all the way through the year.
I think that's broadly right. The one thing I'd say is that the noises he's making on Brexit about dynamic alignment with the EU and greater alignment with the single market are kind of partly aimed, they're partly just what the policy is anyway, but they are partly aimed at these voters that are bleeding out to the Lib Dems, to the Greens, to the rest of it. It's just whether those two messages can coexist.
I've now got a one-word answer for each of you. Is Wes Streeting going to take on Keir Starmer before May? Zoe?
Oh, no, not before May.
No, Zoe took the words out of my mouth.
Two no's, there we go. Complete consensus. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, we started this evening's programmes talking about the shooting of a woman in Minneapolis by immigration agents. And in the last few moments, Vice President J.D. Vance has given his pretty unrepentant reaction in the White House.
This was an attack on federal law enforcement. This was an attack on law and order. This was an attack on the American people. The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile?
He's also called for the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, to resign. I think this story is going to run and run. So do stay with LBC for all the latest coverage. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. Put your news categories in the order you would like them. Pause, rewind, live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Henry Riley. But right now, it's time for Iain Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. British, French.
And gusts of 99 miles per hour have been recorded. Ollie Heptinstall has more for LBC.
The Met Office say flying debris could bring a danger to life, with the red warning in place until 11 o'clock tonight. It covers most of the Duchy, including capital Truro, Penzance, Newquay and Falmouth, as well as the Isles of Scilly, with forecasters warning the exceptionally strong northwesterly winds are expected to damage buildings and homes. They're advising people to stay indoors and to avoid travelling, saying it's not safe to drive in these conditions. We're also told very large waves will bring dangerous conditions to some coastal areas.
The storm will also bring heavy snow to parts of Wales, parts of the Midlands and South Yorkshire. Vigils and protests have been held in America after a woman was shot dead by an immigration officer in Minneapolis. 37-year-old Rennie Good died during a crackdown on illegal immigration by ICE officers. Federal officials say she was trying to run agents over in her car, a claim which has been rejected by local representatives. LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks told Tonight with Andrew Marr thousands more immigration agents will be sent to the state.
The more that takes place, the further there is evidence to suggest that a federal cover-up of the investigation is underway, with the Minnesota authorities being told that they are going to play no role in the investigation. It's only going to be carried out by the FBI.
The US Senate has voted 52 to 47 to advance a resolution that will block military action against Venezuela without congressional authorization. Last weekend, US troops captured the Venezuelan president and brought him to New York to face drug and weapons charges. And 2 oil tankers with links to the country have been seized, one of which had been reflagged to Russia. Today, it's reported a Russian tanker sanctioned by the US has sailed through the Channel. Michael Clark, a former Director General of Defence think tank RUSI, told Andrew Marr seizing the vessel could have repercussions.
Why don't we just get tough with them and pull them in? But the fact is, yes, we can. Yes, we probably should. There will be retaliation. And so you have to be careful in terms of the vulnerabilities that our shipping might have to the Russians taking reciprocal action on some spurious grounds.
It's been announced David Bowie's former childhood home in southeast London, where he wrote Space Oddity, is to open to the public as an immersive experience. The house at 4 Plasto Grove in Bromley, where Bowie lived from the age of 8 to 20, has been acquired by the Heritage of London Trust, which also plans to host creative and skills workshops at the venue. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 3 points at 10,044. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. And the LBC weather, Storm Goretti is moving eastwards across southern parts of the UK tonight. There will be severe gale force winds for the far southwest, heavy snow for Wales and central England, clear skies further north and a low of -5 degrees. The storm will move away eastwards tomorrow, but rain will continue in eastern England with a high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to the programme. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 7 on LBC. We're going to achieve a first on LBC tonight. We're going to have 5 LBC presenters in the same studio for the first time ever. What could possibly go wrong? We have 4 of my colleagues on with me on Cross Question. It's the first Thursday Cross Question because Cross Question, in case you didn't know by now, has gone 4 days a week. So Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. But in the first hour of the programme, I want to talk about what was announced yesterday about boots on the ground in Ukraine in terms of a peacekeeping force. Russia has reacted predictably, rather angrily, to this development. They have dubbed Ukraine and its European allies an axis of war. They've warned that British and French troops could become a legitimate military target after Britain vowed to base soldiers in Kiev as part of a peace deal. Now, bear in mind that these soldiers would only be deployed as peacekeepers once there was a ceasefire. I don't know about you, but I don't see any prospect of a ceasefire soon. I don't think Putin has any intention of signing up. Now, this warning from Moscow comes after President Volodymyr Zelensky's allies said they had agreed to key security guarantees for Ukraine at a summit in Paris. Now, Russia slammed the plan as militarist, with its foreign ministry saying that all such units and facilities will be considered legitimate military targets for the Russian armed forces. Now, these warnings have been repeatedly issued at the highest levels and remained valid, according to this Moscow spokesman. So, some fairly chilling words there. And I wonder, 2 questions I want to put to you. How should we respond to this threat to our armed forces? There's basically 2 ways you can respond. Well, 3 ways. You can either ignore it, you can back down, or you just basically tell them where they can shove it. Those are the 3 choices. Which one would you choose? The second question is, if you were a member of Parliament and you had to vote on troop deployment to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force, after these threats, would these threats affect the way that you're likely to vote on that? I suspect they might well do that with MPs across the House of Commons, not just the usual suspects on the left. 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk to Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mail. He's former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff, which is the 3rd most senior role in the British Army. Simon, thank you very much for joining us. How do you think that Britain should react to these sort of slightly chilling threats from Russia?
I think your point was well made earlier on, Ian, that if you're going to do peacekeeping, there's got to be a peace to keep. And I don't think Keir Starmer, or do I say any of the other people who signed it, genuinely think we're going to preempt a peace by putting peacekeepers in. I think the statement of intent is important because were we to get a ceasefire, and I'm probably with you in being sceptical, you've got to move fairly fast. You can't then start thinking, how do we cobble this together? This is good military planning. There's always a great cry that you say, oh, you're planning to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. No, we have a plan to put boots on the ground. We are not planning to put boots on the ground. There's a very subtle distinction when people use the word plan. Equally, nothing unusual coming out of Moscow. They're on a very sticky wicket at the moment. I think the war has gone horribly badly for them. It's horrifying to think it's nearly the 4th year coming up, Ian, and you'll have been reporting and talking about this for the last 4 years. The human cost has been extraordinary. But in the meantime, Putin has got increasingly stronger from a personal point of view, but his country increasingly weaker, and the context has changed hugely. So we shouldn't be surprised about the threats, but we should take them seriously. But as I say, I do not think there are any circumstances under which they would go in. At the moment, of course, to answer your second question, which way would people likely to vote? One can only say, were there to be a peace to keep, then Britain, as a major ally, major NATO ally, friend of Ukraine, one should expect to be in some sort of leadership role. But this is very chicken and egg situation at the moment.
What do you make of the fact that it's only Britain and France that seem to be part of this coalition of the willing, which I thought was going to be extended more or less across the EU? The Germans have made clear they're not providing anyone. Now, maybe that's because they're going back for historical reasons, and I suppose we have to understand that. But it does seem a little odd that it's just Britain and France.
Yeah. I can only assume that there are discussions going on in parallel, Iain. The major one, of course, when we talk about security guarantees, we've got to be really realistic about what we, all the French or ourselves together, could really bring to the party. You know, years of neglect, another story which I know you've covered many times in terms of investment in the armed forces in an increasingly dangerous world. The idea we could do this without, frankly, the Americans underpinning a peace, even a ceasefire, and certainly a security guarantee is to my mind, fanciful. There might have been a time, but at the moment, this seems to me to be part of a jigsaw or a mosaic that might come into operation. And there'll be all sorts of what they call branches and sequels that would fall out from this, that one can imagine. So it's a statement of intent. The military planners will be doing their business. There's an awful lot of command and control, communications, coordination, logistics behind it. So you have to do this planning. It's sensible stuff. But I would not see a boot on the ground in the context of that anytime soon at the moment.
Even if there was a ceasefire suddenly announced tomorrow?
Well, I'm back to your point, Iain, that you and I agree that at the moment it's unlikely that Putin feels that he's got anything like what he might have hoped to have got out of this. And I don't think he feels threatened enough at the moment. But I think the American role is absolutely critical here.
But I suppose, I mean, going back to 1982, I don't know what you were doing in 1982, but a task force was put together to go to the Falklands within 3 days. And presumably, I'm not sure that there would have been a plan that you could have just sort of taken off a dusty shelf at the Ministry of Defence to do that. That had to be done on the spur of the moment. This is rather different, isn't it?
It is, but I was actually the ADC to the Corps Commander, a man called Nigel Bagnall, became Field Marshal Nigel Bagnall, whose biography I am literally writing at the moment.
Good plug.
A great man, one of the great legacies that at least we still think at the right level. We had a huge army. We were 162,000. We had a fleet. I think we dispatched 47 capital ships. We had squadrons. We had any number of armed forces that we could deploy. And of course, it was in national interest. We couldn't even do the Falklands now. But that said, if it was an issue of national interest, of course, Ukraine is of national interest, but it's not a direct attack on, I suppose, direct British interests as the Argentine attack on the Falklands were, we would go because we have the capacity to that, assuming we got the political wherewithal. This is not direct British national interest. It's a coalition interest. It's NATO interest. It's the West's interest. But it is not something I suspect that the Prime Minister or Parliament would commit boots on the ground unless you wanted to fight. I think the context is so different. The tragedy is we couldn't even do the Falklands at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mail there, former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff. Well, Emily Ferris is Senior Associate Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute think tank, who specialises in Russian military affairs and politics. Emily, very good evening to you. Do you think that this is just typical Kremlin sabre rattling? And how seriously should the British government take it?
Well, I quite agree that we shouldn't ignore threats from Russia. And, very similar to sort of your previous conversation, even if there is some sort of formal ceasefire in place, even if that were to happen tomorrow. You only need to look to the beginning phases of 2015, when with this initial sort of conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and there was a ceasefire in place at various different points, and they were routinely violated. So there is always a risk if there were to be some sort of military presence from NATO forces in Ukraine, there is a risk that there is some sort of collateral damage. And it's true that Russia, it's tempting, I think, to think of Russia as saber-rattling, but I think we should take these threats quite seriously.
How should they alter the plans that already are being prepared, though?
Well, I think the big problem at the moment, the way I see it, is that they're trying to solve both kind of an immediate and a long-term problem with a single solution. Because the immediate problem is trying to end the war on terms that are as close to in Ukraine's favour as possible to obviously prevent sort of further loss of life, further economic loss, all of these things. And I think the second longer-term problem is really what to do about the future of Russian rearmament in Europe. So how do you make sure that Ukraine is protected against any future military threats from Russia? Because Russia, of course, has been quite clear that it intends to entirely subjugate Ukraine in future, and that is part of its military plan. So the question is really, is there any combination of the coalition of the willing forces that would be sufficient to deter Russia long term and stop it from attempting to retake Ukraine in, say, I don't know, a timeline of the next 5 to 7 years when Russia intends to rearm? And I think at the moment the answer is not.
And what do we know about the number of troops that might be deployed from both Britain and France? Because Keir Starmer seemed very reluctant to talk about numbers at PMQs. And then I think I saw an MOD spokesperson saying, well, it would be maybe around 7,500. And if that is going to be roughly the figure, would that be the same from the French? And do we know that if the Americans are committed to deploying anybody also?
Well, that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Is do we think that the Americans are likely to underpin any kind of commitment from other NATO forces? And because they haven't signed up to any joint statement coming out of these conversations, the answer at the moment appears to be not. And clearly, without the Americans enforcing this, it's not likely to be the sort of thing that would sufficiently deter Russia. But really, the numbers, the amount of troops coming from either Britain or France or supported by the Americans, sort of doesn't make a difference to Putin. It will not be, I think, a very clear distinction in Moscow's mind between plans talking about whether there could be troops on the ground in Ukraine versus actual intent. I think as far as Russia is concerned, this very much plays into a Kremlin narrative that NATO, or I suppose what it calls this flank of NATO, the European flank of NATO, because it tries to make a distinction between us and the Americans, is already at war with Russia. And that means that Russia can deploy the resources and the personnel and the finances accordingly to counter what it sees as that military threat.
What is the most likely Russian response? I mean, if there were British peacekeepers in Ukraine, I mean, they're not going to invade Britain. They could launch maybe a missile strike against a British target, or they could cut some of the undersea cables. But clearly they've got submarines monitoring those at the moment. What's the most likely response?
Well, I mean, of course, there's a huge amount of resources that Russia does put to these sort of sabotage attacks across different NATO countries. It varies depending on Russia's actual intelligence capabilities in different countries and ability to sort of penetrate more deeply into Europe. So, of course, undersea cable attacks, disinformation, actual physical disruption of railway lines, particularly in Poland, and these are sort of trying to disrupt supplies that are going into Ukraine. But at the moment, in terms of the attacks that we've seen already, Russia hasn't really been able to do it in a coordinated way that has actually managed to stop supplies going into Ukraine. And that's either because it doesn't necessarily need to, it's enough to sort of sow that chaos, or it could be because it really does lack the resources to do that. Now, in terms of targeting of the UK, Russia has increasingly been upping its intelligence penetration of United Kingdom in terms of the GRU and the FSB, and it can take a lot of different forms, including directly trying to stop supplies and going to Ukraine by sort of setting fire to warehouses and things like that. But of course, the big problem is that these are often uncontrolled. They use third-party proxies to do that, which, is a degree of sort of plausible deniability that Moscow didn't say it had nothing to do with them. But also these people are relatively uncontrolled. So there's a risk of collateral damage. There's a risk of civilians becoming injured if there's sort of IED attacks and explosive attacks. So there's lots of different ways that Russia could necessarily, respond if it felt that the UK was playing more of a military role in Ukraine, for sure.
Okay, Emily, thank you. That's Emily Ferris from the Royal United Services Institute. 0345 6060 973. Two questions for you. How should we respond to this threat from Russia to our armed forces? And also, do you think this is going to affect the way that MPs will vote when it comes to a vote on whether these so-called boots-on-the-ground peacekeepers should be deployed? I detect a certain nervousness among some MPs across the House of Commons, not just restricted to one party. 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, as of Monday, you can now watch our whole show live on Global Player, the LBC app and the LBC YouTube channel. So if you'd like to watch our proceedings, feel free. It's not just cross-question anymore. It's the whole show. 19 minutes past 7.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They have fatal incompetence.
Straight to the point.
What is the problem they've got over there?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The country's going backwards. Growth down. Energy prices up.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
21 minutes past 7 on LBC. Rachel says the idea that there is a plan to put boots on the ground in a peace scenario is preposterous. Why do you say that? Because there have been all sorts of conflict zones where there have been either UN peacekeepers or other peacekeepers that have been put to maintain the peace. I don't see why that is a preposterous suggestion. Anyway, Rachel continues, members of NATO's military force lining the Ukrainian-Russian border. I'm not surprised Putin is annoyed. Pure provocation. How is it provocation when you have peacekeepers? I mean, that is a ludicrous thing to say. And surely in any conflict, there have got to be people who want to keep the peace. And if they don't come from NATO countries, where are they going to come from? I mean, that's a question I would ask you, Rachel, there. Let's take another one. This is from Mark. Only France from the entire EU is actually willing to commit peacekeeping troops. And that tells you everything about how seriously Europe is taking the situation in Ukraine. Meanwhile, it's Britain, a country that isn't even in the EU anymore, stepping up again. I don't think it makes any difference at all whether we're in the EU or not. The EU has never been a defence organisation. It has pretensions to be, I think. Who knows, in years to come, it may well be. But at the moment, it doesn't have any sort of army. It doesn't have a defence force. It's individual countries that make a decision on whether to support different initiatives that NATO undertakes. Now, I would have thought, and given that Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, they were the two instigators of the coalition of the winning, whenever it was, last year sometime, Yes, it was last year, wasn't it? It was about the middle of last year. It was the first time this phrase actually came to mind. And I think 32 different countries signed up, including countries outside Europe. So I mean, that in itself ought to have been a very positive thing. So how has it got to the point where it's only 2 of those 32 countries that are actually willing to put their money where their mouth is, put their soldiers where their mouth is, if you want to put it like that? It seems odd that it's just Britain and France. And I would say again that if Germany wants to step up to the plate, it's got to do it properly. Yes, Germany has provided, in value terms, more arms and munitions to Ukraine than any other country. Credit to them for that. But in the end, I think we've got to get out of this mindset, or perhaps Germany has got to get out of this mindset, that it would just be a bit wrong to have German soldiers in Ukraine. I mean, if we can have British soldiers, if we can have French soldiers, we should have German soldiers. We've got to get out of this World War II mindset. And I thought Germany had emerged from that, and particularly with the new foreign policy that the previous German government announced, I thought that they had moved on from that. So do you think that it is right that there should be peacekeepers from Britain and France on the ground in the event of a brackets unlikely close brackets ceasefire? Or do you think, no, this is something that we should just not be doing? But if we don't, who does? I mean, if the rest of Europe, apart from France, isn't willing to do it, I mean, what happens in the event of a ceasefire? Because we know that most ceasefires are breached in some ways. You look at the Israel-Gaza ceasefire, which has been breached multiple times by both sides. So you can't really have any confidence that Putin is necessarily going to keep to a ceasefire that he signs. I mean, I don't think he will sign a ceasefire anytime soon. But there we go. Let's hear from Sean in Concert. Hello, Sean.
How are you doing? I think we should just keep out of it. Like, we cannot afford to be in a World War III. This could end up in World War III, This really could be a World War III.
How?
And I tell you what it is. Because why are we getting involved? This country is involved with every other bloody country. Do you know that? And I don't understand why. Keep out of it. We can't even afford to...
You could argue that what Ukraine is doing now is materially to the benefit of Western European countries, certainly as well as Eastern European countries. And it is in our interests that Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine win this. And if they, even if they don't, and there's some sort of ceasefire, there's got to be some sort of peacekeeping mechanism, hasn't there?
I don't think they're going to win it, man. I think that Russia is just waiting for an excuse to just bomb the hell out of people. I think that's what's good. This is where the World War III that could come into it, right? You've got an idiot of a president in America, right, that said that that woman wasn't murdered. She was murdered. She was murdered. And if that president in America turned around and said, she tried to ram. She didn't try to ram nobody. I've seen it all in the news, black and white. You know what I mean? She did.
We'll be talking at that at 7:45 with Simon Marks.
But at the end of the day, mate, we cannot have a president in America that thinks it's all right just to shoot an innocent people.
Well, I mean, Sean, we're going off the subject completely here.
No, I know, but at the end of the day, there could be a World War III, mate.
Well, nobody is going to argue for that. No one in their right mind would want that. But I mean, the counter argument is that if you don't stand up to a dictator like Putin, you're actually making war more likely.
He's just going to stand up to anybody that gets in front of him anyway. He's a very powerful man, and I think he's more powerful than America.
Well, how do you work that out?
Because he's got more nuclear bombs and more nuclear stuff that can just wipe the whole... He could wipe the whole place, you know what I mean?
Well, so could America. That's always been the case, that both Russia and America have always been able to wipe each other out. It's called mutually assured destruction, which is why it hasn't happened.
That's what could happen.
Well, I don't think...
This is why you could end up in a war and a World War III.
Well, only if you believe that America wouldn't respond, and I think Putin knows that America would respond.
I don't think they would. I don't think they would. I think he would drop the bomb on America before they could drop the bomb on Russia.
Well, I mean, it's a pointless speculation because neither of us can know exactly how that would pan out.
You don't know how evil they are.
Oh, I think I know how evil Putin is.
Trump is round the twist, right? And you got Putin that's round the twist. You know, you had Johnson that was round the twist. I mean, what the hell's the world coming to?
Well, we are in a totally new era, aren't we? And we may not like it, but we have to live with it. And all we can do is influence at the margins.
Well, I think if it comes down to it, I think the troops should turn around and say, "Bugger you, I'm not going there."
Well, that's Sean. You know, on the radio, particularly at this time of day, you shouldn't be swearing. You've done it twice now, so three times and you're out.
I honestly think it's going to end out of World War III.
Well, I hope for all our sakes that you're wrong on that. Thank you very much. Mike says, UK and France are choosing to be peacekeepers because they know it is unacceptable to Russia. It's a way to keep the war going until the UK, Europe and the US under a different president are prepared to attack Russia. Seriously, Mike, get a grip of yourself, mate. I mean, that is just conspiracy theory lunacy. You seriously think that Britain and France actually want to have a war with Russia, want to attack Russia? I don't know what planet people like you live on, because it's not the one that most of ordinary people inhabit. But thank you for your contribution. 0345 6060 973. Now, in a moment, we're going to get the latest on the sanctioned Russian oil tanker, which has been sailing up the English Channel today, only a day after British forces helped their American counterparts seize another Russian-flagged vessel. So we'll talk about that in just a few moments' time. But we'll take more of your calls in a moment on on how you think Britain should react to these threats that have come from Moscow today. It's 7:30. Let's get the latest news headlines from Tim Humphrey.
Publicans may have cause for celebration soon. LBC understands ministers are preparing to announce a U-turn on planned business rate rises. Landlords had feared the end of COVID-era support could make their bills soar. Storm Goretti has landed in the UK with fierce winds blasting the southwest coast of England. Heavy snowfalls are expected in the Midlands and parts of Wales in the next few hours. Winds of 99 miles per hour have already been detected at St Mary's Airport on the Isles of Scilly. Sir Keir Starmer's had a second phone call with President Trump as the US leader repeats threats to take over Greenland. The Prime Minister has also spoken to Denmark's leader, saying Greenland's future is a matter for its people. LBC weather, Storm Goretti moving eastwards across southern parts of the UK tonight. Severe gale force winds for the far southwest, heavy snow for Wales and central England, and a low of -5 degrees.
LBC. Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
7:32 on LBC. Well, as I mentioned, there's been a Russian oil tanker sailing gently up the English Channel today, only a day after British forces helped their American counterparts seize another Russian-flagged vessel. Richard Holmes is security correspondent for the newspaper, and he's joining me in the studio, slightly bedraggled after, what is it, Storm Gorrit, is it?
I think so. I've been so engrossed in this story that I hadn't been reading the storm news, so much to my dismay.
This is another reason why you should be watching us tonight. Now, Richard, what's going on with this ship?
So this is quite an interesting situation, coming just a day after, obviously, the US and UK joint operation to seize the Bella 1. This Russian Shadow Fleet tanker is heading its way down the channel, and we've just published, actually, that it's not the only one. There is another one following it. And
when you say down the channel, which direction?
Through the channel. This one's going eastwards and actually heading to the Gulf of Finland, I believe. But there is another one going that way with it. And in fact, in the last 3 days, there have been 50 of these sanctioned Russian ships all around UK waters. I think it's significant because it shows the scale of the issue. I mean, we've had some pretty strong action and some equally strong words from the Ministry of Defence, but it shows that this takes more than words. You know, this is Putin's pipeline, which he's fueling his war in Ukraine with. He's not able to trade with the rest of the world, so he requires rusted old hunks of metal bobbing around the oceans, our oceans, to trade illicit oil.
So why haven't we seized one or two of these ships?
Well, I imagine the line will probably be along the lines of the weather, potentially. I mean, these are incredibly tricky operations to carry out. And I mean, we had a very, very good insight into what it takes to actually carry out a manoeuvre like this with the Bella 1, because I was watching for the past 2 weeks all the US military capacity coming to the UK air bases, and you could see the amount of resources it would take to actually carry out an operation like this. So this is another point we're trying to make with this, is that these require specialist teams, of which we do have. But the scale of the issue is so large that to deploy these specialist teams on a basis like this is not really going to work out, and that's what we've been learning. And another reason could just be the fact that they're still trying to get to the grips with this themselves. We've been forced into this position by the US's national security strategy, a bold approach to reclaim this Western Hemisphere under the Don Roe Doctrine, a renaming of the Monroe Doctrine. And we've been pulled into that as a launch pad for this operation. And so do we have that will and capacity to do it on our own? It's yet to be seen.
Well, I suppose we could also say to the Americans, well, we helped you with that one. Do you want to help us with this one?
Yeah, and this is the tricky thing. So we, a day before that operation was carried out, we published a story that we learned that the UK officials were actually having talks with European officials about whether to help or not. And part of the argument about not helping was that it would deter any retaliation from Putin, of which we're kind of already seeing for our support in Ukraine anyway. But the argument for supporting Trump was that, he's been very critical of Europe. This is a great opportunity to stand by him and have a transatlantic operation and success. And that's what we have had. The problem with the current White House is we don't know, with this chaotic and unpredictable foreign policy, is whether or not that favour will be returned. And, it's very much an American-first foreign policy. And is the UK...
Well, it'd be interesting to test that out, actually, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Because if they then said no, I think that would probably tell us all we need to know.
Yeah, and I would argue if they did say no, would we learn about that? Because that, again, angers the situation. It causes a rift. And like I say, we are faced with a bold and aggressive enemy in the east, in Russia, and the events of yesterday only escalate that further. So we do need to keep our relationship with our most strongest ally, the US. So, we've got to play the diplomatic game.
Now, since we've got you here, in this hour we're talking about boots on the ground and the sabre rattling that Russia has been doing today, saying, well, if you do that, they will be regarded as legitimate targets by our forces. How do you think that we will react to that? I suspect we won't react to it at all.
No, I think the conversation around boots on the ground in Ukraine is an interesting one, because I saw some pretty strong comments about, it's a pact about a peace deal that doesn't yet exist, with troops that we don't really have, and do we actually have the capability to be involved in this way? And just as with the events of yesterday, this rhetoric and this conversation, if we were having this a year ago, if we were having it 5 years ago, we would be absolutely shocked. It's become a matter of normal conversation now, and I think we're looking at a trend that's really increasing in rhetoric, and yesterday was an increase in actions, and I do fear for where that's going, and I think the government is taking a stronger position. We've seen the comments coming out of the Ministry of Defence. It's just, we need to see how that is backed up by action, basically.
Okay, Richard, thank you very much indeed. You can brave the weather again now. I'm sure you're looking forward to that. That's Richard Holmes, security correspondent for the I newspaper. Well, let's go to your calls again. Let's go to Steve in Sutton. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Ian. Nice to speak to you again.
Hi.
I was listening to your caller before you broke earlier, the guy from up north, and I found myself largely in agreement with him. The reality of it is, this isn't the early 1940s anymore. You are not going to get the families of the working class and the poor encouraging their kids to sign up and to go and fight. Well, God forbid that such a thing ever became a requirement. When David Cameron went to Brussels to try and get us a better deal before the Brexit vote, there was an opportunity for the EU to give him something to bring back, which he could have used to have arguably to have swayed that vote.
Yeah.
They had no appetite for
agree.
it. Since Brexit, I don't get the feeling when it comes to trade that the EU want to budge with Britain at all. In fact, I get the impression that they're quite keen to punish us as an example to anyone else who might go getting ideas above their station. And yet, when it comes to any sort of conflict, all these other countries in the EU that have got a military, Poland, Italy, the Swedes, the list goes on. They're all more than happy to just sit on their hands and let good old Britain get stuck in with the French, let us put peacekeeping troops there. And as you've alluded to earlier, if something happens, if our peacekeeping troops out there come under attack, that puts the government of this country in a very, very difficult position. So my take on it is there's no way Starmer should be shaking hands with Macron and saying, yeah, this is what we're going to do. There's no way he should be doing that unless all of those other EU nations, big or small, are willing to do the same. Well, there's no way that should be just us and the French.
I rather agree with you, and I hadn't actually thought it through in the way that you have. But I try to put myself in the position of an MP who's going to be sitting in the chamber listening to the debate on whether to deploy British troops as peacekeeping forces. I think we probably do have a responsibility to do that. But you're right. So do all the other countries that have supported Ukraine through the amount of money that they spent on arms and munitions to supply to Ukraine. But they should be stepping up to the plate on this as well, because
they're a lot closer, Ian, than we are to Russia. The Swedes, the Norwegians, the Finns, they should all be, being whipped effectively. I know that the EU doesn't have a military. I know that it all comes under NATO. But look, those countries, they're all meeting, they're all talking, they're happy to gas on about trade all the time, and they're happy to make Britain something of a pariah state and make sure that things are uncomfortable for us. They have got an obligation to be stepping up. And what Starmer should have made clear is, I'm happy to commit our forces as long as you are as well. Yeah. He's made it too easy, and it's bad politics.
I don't disagree with any of that. And I mean, it may well be that there will be MPs who think, well, yeah, I think we should deploy troops, but only if at least 15 other European nations do as well, because that would send a real signal to Putin that Europe is united on this. And it's, look, so far, it generally has been. You take Hungary, you take Slovakia out of the equation, and more or less every other European country has been behind NATO's stance with regard to Ukraine. I think Putin's been very surprised by that, but I think he will probably take succor from the fact that only 2 countries have come out and said, yes, we will put boots on the ground in a peacekeeping force. And maybe these threats that he's issued today are particularly designed to put other countries off doing the same. Steve, great call. Thank you. Tony's in Leighton. Hi, Tony.
Hi, evening, Ian. Second time in a week. And I told you.
I thought I recognised you.
I told your producer I was going to enjoy today's show because I knew, you've already had one little battle. I think you called it before this one. But and I thought, oh, yeah, this is one of my favourite Ian shows.
I'm dreading what's coming now.
I did tell your producer, though, but personally, I think we need to stand steadfast and ignore Putin's threats. He's been issuing these threats since the beginning of the war. And it's like, he said, oh, if anybody else gets involved in the conflict, he's gonna aim nukes at us. He's been threatening us. He's actually done things on UK soil. So I don't really know what people who think that we are not at risk, they're living in cloud cuckoo land.
Yeah.
We've always been at risk. I think the point that your last caller made, I heard the tail end of it. I partially agree with him, except for the fact that I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if it's just UK and France that's sending troops there. We might be the lead body there, but I'm sure others are going to be as invested as we are, for instance.
Well, they haven't said so yet, have they?
Well, maybe. Well, yes, but I'd be surprised if they're not, because even when it seemed like the West has been dragging its heels in terms of what we do about Russia, the Poles are taking Russia quite seriously because they know that after Ukraine, they're next. There are loads of them living in fear there. So I think people here, we kind of like think because we're far away, when we're not at risk. But the question is the people that are in Poland, they already know that they're at risk. The Finns have known for quite a while, for instance. So the Sweden, why did they rush to join join NATO?
Yeah.
So there is that thing. And I think one last point, though, is that as much as we do need to stand, we do need to present a united front against Putin. The risks that are inherent there are, one is the madman that we have in America, who's their president right now, and secondly, the other risk we have is where is the money going to come from? It's every day what we're talking about is nobody wants to pay taxes, so you have the farmers coming. I think the government's going to backtrack on that. We've had U-turns on welfare, and who again did they give a U-turn on? But the bottom line is we don't have that money coming from tax. We don't have our military built up, for instance, and that's why people like Putin can afford to wage a war, because he's not interested in things like welfare for his people. He can spend all of his money on the army, for instance, and we're just not equipped for that. I think we've got too many competing needs. And of course, in peacetime,
but that would be the same. Whatever period of time we're talking about, that would be the same. I mean, yes. I'm sure people deployed that argument in 1935.
Well, probably, but I think maybe a slight difference though would be. Well, no, yes, I agree with you. It is the point, as in, it's the society that we live in. We care for everybody, for instance. Yeah. And it's because of that people like Russia and China are if you're a dictator in a place where you can do what you like, that's why they can wage a war for a very long time. So it's just like different philosophies. They have theirs where they don't care about their people. We care about our people, basically, which is why we're a bit stretched in terms of hardware and other things.
Okay,
yes,
Tony, right. I thought you were spoiling for a fight, but I'm very glad you haven't.
No, as I said, I enjoy. I'll leave the fighting for others.
Thank you very much indeed. Another great call. Let me tell you who's on Cross Question at 8 o'clock. It's our first Thursday Cross Question. And joining me on the panel will be LBC presenters Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage. So if you want to put a question to to all of those, do give me a call now, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your message. We've already had a suggestion for the fun question at the end. You might have some others. It's 7:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The US immigration agent fatally shooting a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis, which has sparked the most extraordinary war of words as local officials reject the Trump administration's account, using language such as a domestic terrorist. Is he in Northampton?
Why is it so easy to shoot people? And we just watch it. Oh, look, she's been shot. This is not the way to go.
Luke's in Westminster.
What's important here is not the intent of the suspect. What's important here is the perception of the danger on the end of the officer.
Charles in Bagshot.
These ICE agents look like thugs and they act like thugs.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
At Kia.
Is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 to 8 on LBC. I think the most watched story on the LBC website today has been about this shooting in Minneapolis by ICE. Simon Marks, you may have heard throughout the day on LBC talking about this. There's been several developments this evening, not least a press conference by J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and quite an extraordinary interview, I mean, when aren't they, that Donald Trump has given to the New York Times, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Simon, what's been the reaction in America more generally to what happened in Minneapolis yesterday?
Well, I mean, it is, of course, attracting an enormous amount of attention, but opinion, I think, is very much split along political lines here, which is utterly astonishing when one considers the video that shows very clearly what took place yesterday on a snowbound residential street in Minneapolis, where an ICE agent fired fatal shots at a 37-year-old motorist, Nicole Good, after her car appeared to block a road down which ICE agents were travelling. Very unclear whether she was deliberately blocking the road or perhaps actually beginning the process of a U-turn that would allow her to get out of the way of what was taking place on that street. Take a listen to the audio of what happened, and we will warn everybody that it is pretty disturbing stuff. Now, members of the crowd immediately started pursuing the ICE agent who fired those fatal shots, screaming at him and his colleague that they were murderers. A physician who was on the street at the time identified himself as a doctor to ICE agents and offered to render medical assistance to the woman who was slumped in her car. He was denied access to her by ICE agents who claimed that they had medics of their own, although it would be fully 15 minutes before an ambulance arrived on the scene and any medical attention was given to the woman who, of course, at that point was dead. 37-year-old Nicole Good, her family says, had absolutely no previous experience of participating in anti-ICE protests, but that didn't stop Vice President J.D. Vance from launching the most extraordinary ranting attack on protesters generally and Ms. Good specifically when he spoke a short while ago from the White House podium.
When I was actually walking out here, somebody sent me a photo of a CNN headline about what happened in Minneapolis. And this is the headline. I'm just going to read it. Outrage after ICE officer kills U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Well, that's one way to put it, and that is the way that many people in the corporate media have put this attack over the last 24 hours. And I say attack very, very intentionally, because this was an attack on federal law enforcement. This was an attack on law and order. This was an attack on the American people. The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile? What that headline leaves out is that that woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. What that headline leaves out is that that woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job.
That woman. He never once used Nicole Good's name as he continued ranting throughout that appearance at the White House. He accused the media of being agents of propaganda of a radical fringe. He said that the victim was part of a broader left-wing network of radicals who have been working tirelessly to make it impossible for the president to do what the American people elected him to do. Said she was part of a lunatic fringe, and absolutely doubled down on everything else that we've been hearing today, which is that the investigation, if one can call it that, into what took place on the streets of Minneapolis yesterday is now going to exclude anyone from Minneapolis, any authority from Minnesota. It is going to be conducted only by the FBI, and it is absolutely apparent already, Ian, what the outcome of that investigation is going to be. They are going to clear the ICE agent who committed that fatal act of force against Ms. Good yesterday, and they are going to drag her name through the mud and tarnish her reputation. And as Vice President J.D. Vance said today behind the podium, he said that what she had done, ramming federal agents with her vehicle, which, let's be clear, never happened, he said that justifies being shot.
Now, it's very difficult for Donald Trump to give an interview that doesn't make headlines, but he certainly surpassed himself in the New York Times interview, hasn't he? You sent me, just before you came on, a screenshot of part of that interview. Just explain to our listeners what he said.
Well, I think also it's very important to ask a question, Ian, which is that if you or I had been in the Oval Office now nearly 24 hours ago, and the President of the United States has said to us, I don't believe in international law, would we have waited the best part of 24 hours to let the world know that that is what the president said? But that, according to this new New York Times splash, based on their lengthy, I think more than an hour in the Oval Office by 4 New York Times reporters yesterday for an interview with President Trump, the president laid out a vision of power restrained only by his own morality. The paper says that on topic after topic, President Trump made it clear that he would be the arbiter of any limits to his authorities, not international law or any international treaties. He said, I don't need international law. This, of course, coming days after his administration launched that military attack on Venezuela, abducted President Nicolas Maduro, was unable to cite any international law to justify that action. And, of course, the Prime Minister has been waiting for the United States to explain itself in international legal terms before he says he can possibly weigh in on what America did in Venezuela last week. Well, now we have our answer. The President of the United States says he doesn't believe in international law, is not going to be constrained by it, and only, he says, his own morality is the only thing that can stop me. Prime Minister, the ball is in your court.
He does add, to be fair, I'm not looking to hurt people, which I'm sure is of great reassurance to everybody listening. Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed. That's Simon Marks, our US correspondent, joining me live from Washington, D.C. Let me just finish the hour with a text here. It says, my son is in the army and there is no way I want him to be sent to Ukraine when Europe has 27 countries and only one is offering up troops. None of our politicians' kids will be going, will they? Europe try everything in the book to ruin us financially, but now they need help. They want us to sacrifice our kids. That's from Gary. Well, coming up in the next hour, it is Thursday's Cross Question. It's the first time that we've ever done the Cross Question on a Thursday, but that's exactly what we're going to do in the next hour, and indeed every Thursday from now on. So we thought we'd mark it by doing something a little bit special. So we've got 4 LBC presenters joining me in the studio to take your calls on contemporary issues, whatever you like. 0345 6060 973. They are Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage. They've got some quite strong opinions between them all, so I imagine we're going to have quite a spirited debate, but it's really up to you to set the debate going by asking your questions. 0345 6060 973. If you're not already watching us on Global Player, the LBC app or the LBC YouTube channel, you might want to switch one of them on.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global Newsroom at 8 o'clock, LBC understands the government's considering a U-turn on business rate rises for the pub sector. In the budget, the Chancellor announced changes to how hospitality is taxed, with venues saying it would see bills soar. Employment Minister Dame Diana Johnson's told LBC it's right the government's listening.
The pub sector have come forward with more information to make their case to ministers, and I think it's right that ministers listen. If a pub landlord or a trade organisation comes forward and says, we understand what your policy wants to do, but this is actually something you need to be aware of, I think that's right, we look at it.
Everyone in Cornwall's getting an emergency alert sent to their phones, with winds of up to 99 miles per hour already recorded. The Met Office has issued a rare red weather warning. Russia's issued a warning to the so-called coalition of the willing following Ukraine peace talks. The Kremlin says any European troops sent to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire would be legitimate combat targets. And the US Senate's voted to advance a resolution that would block military action against Venezuela without congressional authorization. Last weekend, US troops captured the Venezuelan president and brought him to New York to face charges. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 3 points at 10,044. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather: severe gale force winds for the far southwest tonight. Heavy snow for Wales and central England. A low of -5. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The US immigration agent fatally shooting a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis, which has sparked the most extraordinary war of words as local officials reject the Trump administration administration's account, using language such as a domestic terrorist. Is he in Northampton?
Why is it so easy to shoot people? And we just watch it. Oh, look, she's been shot. This is not the way to go.
Luke's in Westminster.
What's important here is not the intent of the suspect. What's important here is the perception of the danger on the end of the officer.
Charles in Bagshot.
These ICE agents look like thugs and they act like thugs.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, it's 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Thursday's Cross Question. You may think they don't normally do Cross Question on a Thursday. Well, we are from now on. And to mark this first edition of Thursday's Cross Question, we have with us in the studio 4 renowned, brilliant LBC presenters. To my left, Sheila Fogarty, who is, of course, here on weekdays from 1 p.m. Next to her, Lewis Goodall, LBC presenter, who's here on Sundays from 10 a.m., co-presenter of the Newsagents podcast. Rachel Johnson, to my right, she's on Fridays from 7 p.m. and presents the Difficult Women podcast. I don't know how difficult she's going to be in this hour, but you never know. And to her right, Ali Mirage, LBC presenter, who's here on Saturdays and Sundays from midday. So they are here to take your calls. I think it's probably the first time that there's been 5 LBC presenters in the same studio. What could possibly go wrong, ladies and gentlemen? Not the last, Lewis. No,
it's not the first
time. Have more confidence in yourself.
It's not the first time.
See, they're already at it. They're already at it before we've even started.
A gaggle.
0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, let's kick off with James in Ayr. Hello, James.
Hello, Ian. My word, what a formidable panel it is tonight.
Well, indeed.
I'm almost intimidated. My question is as follows. In the 20th century in Europe, at least 3 governments were elected which turned out to be fascist administrations. My question is, has this happened in the United States almost by accident? And if it has or hasn't, can the United States Constitution withstand a Trump administration?
Lewis.
I've always been very reluctant to sort of bandy around the F word, the fascist word, with regards to Trump, because I think that fascism and fascist has a very particular sort of set of connotations, which are basically people instantly think about Mussolini and they think about Hitler. Nonetheless, I think it is possible to say that Trump, in much more so than in Trump 1, exhibits certain characteristics which are textbook fascism and textbook far right. I think the day that you could at least credibly argue that he became far right, at least, fascist or not, was of course on January the 6th, 2021, which of course we've just marked the 5-year anniversary of. And I think there are a couple of other things that really disturb me about the development of the way that this Trump administration is going in that far right direction or fascist direction. And there's 2 particular elements to it. One is what we've just seen unfold in Minnesota over the last 24 hours or so. How did Trump respond to what happened in Minnesota? He responded to it not in a way that any typical American president would, which is to say, well, let's wait for the investigation to take place, etc., etc., etc. He backed law enforcement, of course, but so on. He said, without basically seeing any evidence, or before any evidence had concluded, he said that this woman was obviously a domestic terrorist. Obviously. On what possible basis? And then he had various parts of his own law enforcement describe these people, these internal enemies of the United States, in such terms. That is textbook fascism. And the other way in which it is textbook fascism or far right is the way in which increasingly, more and more, there is a cult of personality in the United States. Tiny little vignette, tiny little example. Today, RFK Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary, published a textbook for how Americans should be eating. It's a new textbook for how this should take place. It is strewn throughout with references to Trump and what Trump says you should be doing and the Trump food pyramid and how that should be resurrected.
That's Kim Jong-unish, isn't it?
It is. And you know, whether that's the renaming of the Kennedy Center, the constant insertion, sort of cult of personality of American life. That is not to say that Trump is a fascist or far right in a way that others have been in the past. But I do think it is clear that Trump is not in any way a typical American president and is pushing American politics in a direction that has not been seen before and is an uncomfortable one.
Sheila Fogarty.
Well, I would agree with everything he has just said, but I would add, I hope, some reassurance as well. I mean, there are massive dangers in everything you've just outlined. Of course there are. But we've seen examples where the Supreme Court has still been able to, and it's a very heavily sort of Trumpian, we hear anyway in terms of its politics, Trumpian Supreme Court. They have managed to push back against him on the basis of law. We've seen it over the sending in of the National Guard and federal troops into various states. We've seen it on a number of things where they've pushed back. We've seen even within the MAGA movement push back against him.
If he isn't interested in international law, which is what he said in this New York Times interview, which we were talking about with Simon Marks a few minutes ago, does he respect US law? Does he respect the US Constitution in the same way that all American presidents would have done?
Well, would have done publicly and would have done all the cosmetic commentary to make it look as though they did, but behind the scenes would have also been pulling levers that still favoured them, I would argue. Not in the same way.
It's very difficult to think of more than a handful that you could say that about. I mean, Richard Nixon, Andrew Jackson, possibly Andrew Johnson, but I mean, not that many.
Iraq, I mean, he went through the motions on that second resolution. He was always going to go in.
That was not against the Constitution.
No, it
maybe
wasn't.
against the UN.
But it's still about presidential behaviour and whether you are following the rule of law. And he decided he didn't need to on that particular issue. I get the differences, I get the distinction. But all I would say, there are still some levers that are being pulled and can be pulled, not least an election 3 years from now, in which he will be no more. But I don't say that to detract from anything.
Or will he?
Well, yes, he will. He will go.
You think so? Okay.
On that, actually, can I just say, I saw some footage of the very sad funeral of Tatiana Schlossberg, the daughter of Carolyn Kennedy. Seeing Joe Biden coming out of that funeral is all the proof you need that he should never have considered standing as president again. And anyone who helped him to do that was going in completely the wrong direction.
I still think there's a big story that hasn't been told.
I agree.
Ali Mirage.
Well, I think let's take a step back on what's happened in Minneapolis, where people are calling Trump a fascist. What happened in Minneapolis has got a background to it, quite apart from what happened with the investigation that now has to take place in the shooting of this lady. What has happened here is that there was a systematic abuse going on, a fraud, a gargantuan scale fraud going on, largely by members of the Somali community. Not every Somali, of course, in Minnesota, but by members of the Somali community. And if you look at that, you go back to a Food for the Future program, where millions, 250 million, has been defrauded from American taxpayers because this is federal money. You then look at what's happening in daycare. You then look at other elements of this where people are claiming that they are autistic, right, to get government handouts from the federal government. It's absolutely ridiculous. There could be fraud here occurring to the tune of billions of dollars. Now, that's the context for when Donald Trump comes out in his rumbustious fashion, which is not to everyone's taste, not particularly to mine either, but he actually pushes an open door where people are genuinely concerned about abuse and fraud on a massive scale. And you look at the number of people that have been convicted already, 57, largely 80% of them from the Somali community. Now, that does not mean that every Somali is either illegally in Minnesota or the ones that are there legally are engaging in fraud, but there seems to be a problem. And we had the same thing here in this country with grooming gangs, when people in positions of power didn't want to go to the inconvenient truth. Now, what happened in relation to this particular shooting is very, very
we might, I don't know if we're going to have a question on that.
Well,
maybe,
But yeah, fine. But we'll come to that later. But so I think that there's a context around it. And then if you look to the international level and you look what happened in Venezuela, Trump is mercurial, he's mercantilist, he's very in your face about it, but it's no different. I mean, this has been going on since 416 BC with Thucydides talking about the Athenians taking over Melos. I mean, this is like Thucydides said...
I thought we had Boris Johnson in the room for a moment.
The strong will do what they want, the weak must suffer what they must. And this is no different from Reagan and Grenada. It's no different from Noriega with H.W. Bush. It's no different from what Sheila said about Iraq and the Second Resolution. I mean, come on.
One bit is, Ali, I mean, I actually agree with much of what you're saying there about the. I mean, the rules-based international order was always more Potemkin than it seemed. I completely agree with that. One thing, though, is really different, which is that none of the presidents you just mentioned used that power and used the force of the United States against their own allies, which is something that we've seen unfold this week.
That is true, and that is, I think, a galactic wake-up call for Europe that has effectively been a supplicant for years. And if this is the kick up the backside it needs, then so be it. I mean, for years, I mean, look, I mean, a lot of people say a lot of things about Emmanuel Macron. He's having a tough time. He talked about strategic autonomy years ago and was ridiculed about it, right? And now we're in a position where we have to basically assume the position as Europe because we're not in a position to defend ourselves. I mean, that's the reality. And now we've got our leaders pussyfooting around trying to keep the US on side instead of actually dealing with the fact we've got a 28 billion shortfall in the defence budget for the next few years. We have to not talk about a 2.5% or 3.5%. We have to have a serious conversation about massively rearming if we're going to be serious about dealing with Russian aggression. We can't even deal with one ship potentially at the moment.
Rachel Johnson.
Well, I have to say I'm really learning a lot already this evening, so thank you for the
We want
education.
to learn from you.
Well, I think the question is, break it down into two parts. One, is Trump a fascist? Two, is the Supreme Court equipped to deal with him if he is a fascist? So taking the first, I mean, Lewis has made his points, and I think I tend to agree with him. But, he is elected. He did make history in becoming a returning president for a second term. He is the elected president of the United States. And I think to compare him to Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, I think is an invidious. Comparisons are invidious. I mean, let's just not bother.
But this
is a new world order.
It is.
That's what we have to recognise.
He does display the
fascistic impulse.
No, I'm not going to say fascistic, but he does display some of the attributes, if that's the right word, that dictators have. He thinks in the same way that these strong men think.
He thinks? I mean, I think, we all sit around trying to second guess how he thinks.
Well, the cult of personality, which, as Lewis said, he's clearly
It's
adopting.
a mug's game, yeah. It is definitely a cult of personality. RFK, I mean, it obviously is blowing smoke. Everybody does. You could see that in the coalition of the Willing Summit. No single European leader is willing to stand up to him and stick up for Europe, or the so-called rules-based order that Peter Mandelson said didn't exist anyway in a Spectator article this week.
A polite fiction it was described as, wasn't it?
Moving on to the Supreme Court. As early as tomorrow, we will see whether the Supreme Court has the chops to face down Donald Trump, because they're going to rule on tariffs, potentially as early as tomorrow. If they do screw their courage to the sticking point and say the tariffs are illegal, that's a whole other world of pain. So goodness knows. I think it's going to be a test case. Watch that space.
I mean, to be fair to Trump, he has largely, up to now, been reluctant to challenge or to openly subvert the authority of the courts. Now, you might say that's because largely they've agreed with him, more than lots of legal scholars might have anticipated they would. But he has shown reluctance to openly defy the courts. The only thing I'd say is, I mean, I've sort of said this or looked this up before, but I mean, if we are talking, and again, I sort of say this reluctantly because I just think the sort of fascism word is so loaded. But if you do look up the Oxford English Dictionary definition of fascism, there are 7 components of it. 1 is authoritarianism, power concentrated in a strong leader or ruling elite, well, check. 2, cult of the leader, check. 3, extreme nationalism, America first, check. Us versus them politics, I just refer you to again what I said about Minnesota, check. Suppression of opposition, academia, independent media, courts, check. Disdain for liberal democracy, check. Militarism and glorification of force, check. It's an uncomfortable truth, but Donald Trump does exhibit every single one of those characteristics.
So, I mean, that's a fairly convincing argument that Lewis has put forward there. Do you agree with that, Rachel?
I didn't agree with all of it, actually. I mean, I haven't seen May Day-style parades, particularly on the streets of Washington, D.C. I mean, he came in saying he wanted to be the Prince of Peace. He wanted to get the Nobel Peace Prize. That seems to be much more of an animating spirit within him.
He's just abducted a leader of another country.
Well, he would argue for the benefit of the Western Hemisphere, wouldn't he?
Sure. I would argue that list is pure fascism if there's nothing running in between it. And I think still in America, just about, there are things working against it.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there are plenty of institutions which continue to defend sort of traditional American democracy. But in terms of his instincts, I don't think he's got a problem with any of those things. And I think, this is a man who tweeted out or posted out on Truth Social, that a leader who does everything in the service of his country can be held up to no law. I mean, this is a guy who genuinely believes that his interest and American national interest are one and the same.
Ali. I just think if you look at Minnesota as an example again, I mean, you look at the massive housing fraud, you look at the daycare fraud, you look at all of this fraud that's going on, and you think, how on earth is this happening? And you know what? I think to myself, I wonder why Tim Walz had decided 7 days ago not to go for a third term. Funny that, because he knows this fraud thing is going to follow him around the whole entire election campaign in November, which is why he has decided not to run, quite sensibly, I would say. But then you can't blame Donald Trump, who's saying, no, we're going to have federal investigations into this, which has happened on a massive scale, millions and billions potentially, and we're going to send in ICE to go and look at this stuff. Look, he is, you could say, someone who has got a rather large ego. He's not the only one. The world is dominated by strongmen. Netanyahu, Modi, President Xi, Vladimir Putin, all of them are in that. We're in the New World Order, but it's no different, actually. It's just that Trump is a bit more direct, and much more direct about what he wants, and he's in your face. If you actually look at it, it's not the first or last time that a foreign leader will be deposed in that way.
But certainly I don't think anybody around this table is suggesting that attacking the fraud that's taking place, the people saying they run a children's home and they don't, and all of that, that's absolutely fine. Investigate people in the proper way. But if you create an atmosphere that culminates in the shooting that we saw last night in Minneapolis, and I noticed you haven't mentioned the woman who was shot in the face twice in Minneapolis yesterday, very much in your defence of Donald Trump's approach. I defend his approach to weeding out that fraud and that criminality. And if people are in America illegally and have no place to be there and are criminals and are dangerous, get rid, I say. No problem with that. But if the mood and the tension culminates in what we saw in Minneapolis last night, you do have to look to Trump and ask how much he's contributed to that.
I've got a view on Minneapolis, but we might come to it, so I don't want to preempt the thing. But
I'm not sure if we are, but we may do. So Ali, you know the time. We've got to go to a break. But I think, Lewis, you just wanted to finish.
No, I was just going to say just two things. I mean, I'll just echo what Sheila said about the Minneapolis stuff is Trump is absolutely right to call it out. He's also perfectly legitimately within his rights. And again, Ali, I think you're right. You can draw some comparisons with the grooming gang stuff. You've got to be straightforward. It's absolutely true that with regards to that particular scandal, Somalian Americans or Somalians who are living in Minnesota have been largely responsible. That said, what you don't have to then do is take the next step, which is to call Somalian Americans garbage, which Trump has repeatedly done, and targeted a Somalian American congresswoman and said that she should get out of the country and that she has no place in the United States. And the other thing is, I think that the big difference with Trump, and again, I think this does lead him down some very, very dark paths. I can't think, and you mentioned a couple of other previous presidents who had some disregard for the Constitution. I can't think of another American president who has had such comprehensive, wanton disregard for the Constitution.
No, I agree with that.
He has no interest in the American constitutional history. He has no interest in American democratic norms. The only thing in which he has an interest is Donald Trump. And then I think that is of the 45 men who have been president of the United States, there's been 47 of them. Of the 45 men who have, I think that does mark Trump out as being singularly unique.
Well, James and Al, what have you started? What a great look. We're getting some lovely texts here saying what a great discussion. Thank you all very much for those. We're going to come back home in a moment because last night on Cross Question we spent 45 minutes talking about sort of foreign affairs. Tonight we're not going to do that, not quite so much. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Listen on the move with the new LBC app. Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
21 minutes past 8. With me on Cross Question, Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage. A WhatsApp question now from Mike in Salisbury. After yet another U-turn from this government, can we ever expect them to govern on principles rather than popularity? Bit of background to this. Ministers are expected to announce that pubs will be spared April's increase to business rates, but LBC believes this will only apply to pubs and not the rest of the hospitality sector. Rachel Johnson.
Oh, I mean, when this is such a hot button topic with our audience, pubs, hospitality, business rates, the fact that they are, removing the business rate relief that was introduced during COVID, and then they're going to come out and they're going to say, yes, we put up your rates by 60%. Now we're going to reduce them by 20%. Aren't we being good to you and trying to save your pub? It's not going to be enough, is it? I mean, they've got to move
release,
on VAT.
They had to go at some point.
Yeah, but maybe they shouldn't have done the re-rating for struggling hospitality sector, which is already dealing with the whole raft of other cost rises that they've had imposed on them, partly by government, partly by inflation. They should take away VAT on food and beverage for pubs and restaurants, because you can go and buy a pizza, as you know, in Tesco Metro for £5, and then when you get the same pizza maybe heated up in a pub kitchen, which pays energy price inflation.
But what is a pub? What is a restaurant?
Bill.
Is Greg's a restaurant?
But it's not a level playing field anymore, and it's meaning one pub a day is closing its doors, and Kemi Badenoch is making hay on this.
But isn't that our collective fault? We don't go to pubs enough.
I do. In the country, you have to go to pubs. In the country, where else do you go, Iain? You can't nip to Pret. You can't. The pub is the hub.
That's a good one. I'll steal that. Ali?
Well, it's good you mentioned Greg's, Iain, because I did have a steak bake on the way here. I'm sorry to admit I'm not on the weight loss jabs yet. Look, it's U-turn central, this government. I mean, you've had the 2-child benefit cap U-turn on that. You've had a welfare U-turn. You've had a winter fuel U-turn. You've had a U-turn on IHT for farmers. You've had all sorts of U-turns coming thick and fast. Look, if you U-turn once, you could call it a virtue. U-turn twice, you call it careless. U-turn 3 or more times, downright incompetent. And what credit is the government going to get from the hospitality sector for taking all the hits, all the abuse, all the way through, and then U-turning now? And to Rachel's point, it's not just the pubs. It's hospitality, it's hotels, it's other visitors as well. All of them are suffering this thing, and they're also being hit with a triple whammy. It's not only the business rates, it's also the minimum wage, and it's also these day one rights for workers as well. So it's really tough out there. It's really, and the national insurance rise as well, yeah.
But then you could extend it and you could say the whole retail sector is paying all those, and that's why we're not seeing kids getting Saturday jobs anymore, because the first thing that goes, obviously, is jobs and starter jobs. And that's a whole generation of young people who are not. I was my first job checkout girl at M&S. I mean, M&S is a
Which
large
department?
Foods. I had to keep going into the freezer. But I wish I'd had a steak bake like Ali. But our kids aren't getting those jobs anymore.
I get it, but look, Iain, you've written biographies of Margaret Thatcher.
Only one.
Look, you turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. I mean, this government's U-turn central. I mean, you can't. How can you have respect of the public and your own backbenchers when you are basically for being pushed around from pillar to post? Okay. I mean, we don't know from one day to the next.
She did get into trouble over the poll tax. Let's not forget.
Well, that is true.
I think some elements of this are starting. They're not there yet, obviously, but they're starting to feel a bit poll taxy to me in terms of the sheer numbers of people saying enough. I can take no more with your taxation. On the question about will they act out of a sense of popularity, I don't think that's what's at play here. I know Labour MPs have been banned from some pubs and but I think what's at play here is another parliamentary moment in which they face their own MPs saying, no way, not going to vote for this element of the finance bill, not going to do it. And to face that kind of defeat in Parliament from their own MPs is also haunting them on this, I think. And there's been a great deal of pressure from MPs.
Lewis?
Look, I think this goes to the heart of what I thought about for quite a while, which is a sort of Starmer paradox, right? Which is that we've got a government, and I remember when Starmer was elected in July 2024, that there was a sense that suddenly normality would be restored. because
the adults are back in the room.
Absolutely.
Who said that?
Well, lots of people,
it?
but John Sopel, I think. But the
and Andrew.
Yes, he
Andrew
did, didn't he?
because this was the first government with a big parliamentary majority for a long time. Boris Johnson had one in 2019, but obviously there was so much going on with COVID and Brexit that this would be a sort of period of normality. And yet, Starmer and Reeves appear unable to govern. I think basically the rot set in at the moment of the retreat on the welfare rebellion. It became very clear that the day-to-day management of the government was actually, in a very unusual way for a government with such a big majority, outsourced to the Parliamentary Labour Party. And the capacity for the Parliamentary Labour Party to absorb any unpopularity or absorb any difficult decisions was very low. And that partly comes back to the other part of the paradox, which is, I think Starmer is almost unique, I think, for a Prime Minister with a big parliamentary majority, for being unable to go to his backbenchers and say, do what I want because you are only here because of me. His personal...
Tony Blair could always say.
Blair could do it, Thatcher could do it, Boris Johnson could do it. His personal authority over the Parliamentary Labour Party is very low. He can't go to his backbenchers and say, you're here because of me, because they will actually turn around and say, if anything, we think we're here in spite of you, or at the very least, we won't be here because of you. And that means that even for a government with such a big majority, it's far more frail than it appears. And so we're going to see this time after time after time, because of course if they retreat on pubs, the next thing we'll say, well, why should pubs be exempted? Why just pubs? Why not other
that will come quickly.
But that will come very quickly.
But then, Lewis, who in the government, right, is actually, apart from Morgan McSweeney, who seems to get it, and maybe Shabana Mahmood, who's half competent, I mean, who actually sees round corners in this government to prevent these kind of mess-ups occurring, where the government gets slapped around and then U-turns all the time? Isn't this basic competent 101 government?
Well, I think so much of it ultimately goes back to some of the original sins in opposition, right? So, I mean, the only reason they're having to do this, and this was obvious as well in the run-up to the most recent budget, was that Reeves needs the money, the Chancellor needs the money, and therefore that was why there was so much discussion about whether they would go back on the manifesto pledge around income tax or national insurance. Obviously, there was a decision at the centre not to do that in the end, despite the fact that she had led the Parliamentary Labour Party up to the top of the hill. But what it meant was you had to have this sort of smorgasbord of other different taxes, which was very clear was always going to be politically contentious. So I think this is going to be like skinning an onion. You're just going to have this one and then the next one and the one after that.
Right, we will come to some more domestic subjects in a moment. In fact, one of them is quite international as well, coming up in the next half an hour with our panel, Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage. It's coming up to 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The government's considering a U-turn on business rate rises for the pub sector outlined in the budget, with an announcement expected next week. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch welcomed it, but told us she wants to see a reduction in VAT for the sector as well. 99-mile-per-hour gusts have been recorded as Storm Goretti brings what the Met Office is calling dangerous winds to the UK. Cornwall and the Scilly Isles are covered by rare red weather warnings. And an ex-Premier League referee has been spared jail over a sexual video of a 15-year-old boy found on his laptop. The judge told David Coote he had a spectacular fall from grace. LBC weather: severe gale-force winds for the far southwest tonight. Heavy snow for Wales and central England, a low of -5 degrees.
This is LBC.
Hi, I'm
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:31. Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage are with us. You get a lovely shot just there of Rachel Johnson drinking her water. Right. Next question from Gemma. Which groups does our tax system most work for and most work against? Sheila, let's start with you.
They work against freelance journalists like me, and they have been for years, and it's doing my head in.
We all agree with you.
Yeah, but that's my selfish
Where's
moment.
that tiny violin the audience is going to get out?
Well, no, trust me, it's been, they're awful. I'm not a fan of the Treasury for reasons you full know, IR35, when they came after freelancers. And it wasn't just presenters and people like Gary Lineker and what have you. IR35 is a means of taxing people that looks at almost any freelancer and decides they're employed. And it includes bank nurses, it includes supply teachers, it includes very young producers on barely any money and reporters and what have you. I understand the shape of the policy, but to say it's been implemented
Does
wrongly.
it actually work for anybody, the tax system?
The Treasury. Oh, well, this one works for the Treasury. It's basically a shakedown.
But the question is about which groups does our tax system most work for and most work against? So you've identified a group that it works against. But what about works for?
Well, that's about how much you get in, I suppose. And if there are sectors that need to be taxed differently, and that might mean more, so be it. And like I said, the origins of that IR35 idea were not bad. How it was implemented and then how it was just the net thrown incredibly widely was a shakedown, plain and simple.
Rachel?
Oh, I think we've got to remember that not a single member of the cabinet has created a job and doesn't understand how the private sector is providing everything. All the revenue.
Can I just tell you, we had a Labour MP this week on Cross Question, Luke Charters, York Outer, who has got a business background. He completely, because we went into this with him, he completely got it. And I thought, well, why aren't they making more use of you?
Reeves? Why can't he explain about, how you create growth? Anyway, so my point would be a general one, which is the private sector is very heavily taxed. The public sector is more lightly taxed. I think they were exempt from the rise in NICs for employer contributions to NICs. So the public sector was let off the hook. The private sector's on the hook for everything. What we're seeing is a situation, and I've used this before and I enjoy this, is the rider is getting too heavy for the pony. And the ride is going to topple and collapse. And unless they understand the basic economics of growth, this government's it's doomed. It's a cliff edge. And I agree with what you were saying in the break, Sheila. I don't see how Keir and Rachel Reeves can survive when business, pubs, retail.
What's said in the break, Rachel, stays in the break.
Oh, it wasn't that bad.
It's
I've said it on air.
crying out for them to do something to help.
Okay, Lewis.
The tax system benefits, to answer your question directly, it benefits the old and the rich. And if you're old and you're rich, then it benefits you most of all.
Don't you start on your inheritance tax.
I knew you were going to say that.
I wasn't talking about inheritance tax. Let me give you a very, very concrete example. The chances are that a young person listening to this who is on a modest income will be paying a higher rate of marginal tax than the people sat around this table. Why do I say that? Well, because even if they're a basic income tax payer, let alone if they're a higher income tax payer, which is the threshold is much lower than it used to be, if they are a graduate, for example, they're effectively paying an extra 9 to 10% in marginal taxation. They could be paying, just someone on a basic rate of taxation could easily be paying, if you've just left university, a 40% marginal income
and
tax
if you get half
rate.
decent salary quite quickly, it could be 60%.
And it could be even more than that. Whereas you might have a pensioner who is exempted from paying national insurance contributions, who is still in work, who is paying a much lower rate. Let's take an example. If you're deriving most of your income from assets and from wealth, you will be paying a lower rate of tax than you are if you're extracting your income from a wage. This is wrong. This is wrong. And you mentioned inheritance tax, Iain. I'm sorry, I will bring it up since you so kindly mention it, and we can relive that, and I can get my mentions back going again. We are in a situation where, look, if you are of a certain age in this country, the chances are, if you are a property owner, you will have benefited enormously from an asset price boom, which you did nothing to deserve and which is unlikely to ever be repeated. We are going to go over the next 10 to 15 years through a period where there are huge inheritances which will be passed on, windfalls which will be passed on. I would much rather, you know what I'd rather do? And I said this before on this station, I'll say it again. I would much rather lower the rate of taxation on income for young people who are trying to make their way through the world in circumstances, economic circumstances, which are far harder than previous generations had to experience, and increase taxation on unearned wealth and inheritance, which the people inheriting it have done nothing to do.
But no politician from right or left is going anywhere near.
No, I agree completely. But ultimately, you asked me what I think, and that's what I think.
But you know that would just be, it wouldn't raise any more money for the Treasury, it would just penalise the wealth creation.
Let's bring it down.
Rachel, sorry, just to come back on it.
Because the wealth would walk, it would leave, you would see huge capital flight.
Why?
I half agree with you, just cut income tax for everybody. You know, get Arthur Laffer, to educate them.
No, let's get Henry.
Get them both.
Ali.
The problem that we've got here is when we talk about the system working or not working for people is that we forget that we had a little thing called COVID, which cost 400 billion. Yes, there was mismanagement of funds and VIP fast lanes and stuff, but it cost a shed load of money. So when people were getting excited about the fact that Rishi Sunak was doling out cash for furlough, that cash was going to have to be paid back at some point. So we've got 400 billion of a hangover from COVID. We've got 2.7 trillion of public debt. We are in a dire situation, and people forget that we actually have to have confidence from the international bond markets to keep this show on the road, right? We're reliant on what Mark Carney used to call the kindness of strangers. So that's the backdrop that we have. Now, how do you balance the books while also trying to deal with what Rachel is alluding to, which is growth, which is anemic in this country? And it's not a Labour issue. It's been anemic in this country for the last 15 years, right? I mean, our productivity growth is absolutely woeful. Now, why is that? Partly, it's very fundamental issues. Manufacturing issues, skills, education system, all of this stuff, the fact that people are being sold a pup to go to university.
2 weeks off at Christmas as well, which no other country
does. All this stuff. So
I had 1 week.
I didn't have any.
The system does work for certain people. That pensioners have
violin again.
Pensioners have been mentioned, and I think pensioners get a raw deal. However, I do think it's indefensible in the current environment that the triple lock is still being maintained, 2.5% inflation or average earnings. It's simply indefensible given where we are now. I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's not defensible.
And that's why no politician, I mean, the number of politicians that have been in this studio doing this programme, and we talk about the triple lock, and they all come out with the magic, we're dedicated to it, and then the red light goes off. Of course, we know it's got to be changed.
And if I could just add to what you were saying there about young people, I think young families in particular, or just a particular element of once people start to have children, the numbers of times I speak to callers when we talk about the cost of childcare, just as an example, and then two people running a household, both working, sometimes really quite decent salaries as well. We're not talking about, the low paid particularly. And they cannot make it work once they have children. Something's got to give. Somebody gives a job up, or somebody carries on, normally the woman, in her job, and all of that money goes on childcare. We've got to get better using the tax system to support young families.
And the birth rate is through the floor. Yes. I mean, the birth rate is 1.47 in this country for the average woman, and we've got a birth crisis in this. And you can't import your way by allowing loads of people in, because immigrants also get old.
Hungary reduces women's income tax based on each child she has.
30 years ago, the average house price in this country was roughly 4 times average income. Today, it's 9 times average income.
Insane.
And that goes back to what I was just saying about the massive intergenerational disparities which exist. And Ali's right. I mean, look, I think that, whatever happens, I mean, and you're right to say that, perhaps no government's going to sort of take the sort of actions that I'm talking about. Fair enough. What any government should do, and the principal problem for this government, is that there is no serious or credible growth strategy. Right? There is no serious, because the truth is we can talk about tax all day long, but there are countries in Europe and beyond in the OECD that have higher overall rates of tax than we do, and they have stronger growth, and there are countries with lower overall rates of tax than we do, and they still have stronger growth. Tax is part of the component in unlocking growth, but it's by no means the only one. And until we actually have a serious conversation about how we're going to address growth in this country and the structural problems of our economy, then we're just going to end up in this doom loop year after year.
Just on this point, Lewis, because it ties into the whole America situation or whatever. People talk about international affairs at the moment, and we've got to take care of our own security. Yes, we do. There are 2 other things we also have to take care of. Our energy, both self-sufficiency and cost of energy, and also tech. right? Because that's what's coming down the track. Now, if we're living in a world where Europe doesn't have any of its own real tech champions, apart from ASML in the Netherlands, right, which produces these chips and stuff. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, we should be telling the US, get lost. Do you want to buy our champions? Sorry, tough. No, we're going to play hardball with you. You're not going to buy champions in Europe. We're going to develop our own domestic champions and all the free market and all the international trade and everything else. I believe in all of this, but you do need to, in a world that's becoming increasingly mercantilist, you do need to have some core stuff that you produced other than lawyers and bankers and accountants. We need to actually take care of ourselves.
Rachel, you want to come in?
No, I didn't know what the champions were, but you're right in saying we're far too heavily dependent on our services, with which we never had a free trade agreement with the EU. We haven't talked about Keir Starmer's new flirtation with the, what is it, the customs union?
Customs union, single market. Yeah.
Is that a growth strategy? I think it could be.
But Rachel, you look at China. They don't allow these Western social media companies to come into their space. They don't allow it. The US doesn't allow
so we
China
should
to
emulate China.
Really? No, but China's playing hardball. The US is playing hardball with China by not allowing Chinese TikTok to be owned by China in the US. We have to wake up and understand that we are in a competitive world. The world order's changing. It's increasingly the fact that we're going to stand our own.
It's a competitive world, and you're right, it is. You don't shut the competition out of your own market.
But we have to become more self-sufficient. If this is not a wake-up call for cheap energy, I mean, our energy costs in this country are one of the highest in the world. I mean, you go to any
which is self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted.
Net zero, yeah.
Came up multiple times on budget day when we did the program.
I'm not saying net zero is bad, by the way. I believe in wind farms and all the rest of it, and I believe that we should decarbonise, but you have to do it sensibly. You have to take people with you.
And it's not just, and in fairness, I mean, look, there are net zero problems, but it's also as a result of governments over many years failing to invest enough in our long-term energy infrastructure of any kind.
I want to fit in a quick question before we go to a break. So brief answers on this if we can. It's from Sarah in Crystal Palace. If Elon Musk won't stop his disgusting AI bot from sexualising women and even girls without their consent, what should the government do in response? Now, Keir Starmer has called this scandal disgraceful and disgusting and said that he's asked the media regulator Ofcom for all options to be on the table if X won't stop the sexualising of photos itself. Sheila.
Well, I'll give you an example that my own producer showed me today. Maya Jama, the broadcaster, put a picture of herself, just her face and shoulders, on X, and said, "Dear Grok, I don't give my permission for this image or any images of me to be changed at any point." Grok responds saying, "Thank you, we have heard you and we will not be changing any images of you in the future." Someone responds to that, to her original tweet, and says, "Dear Grok, this person isn't Maya Jama. Can you please change her into somebody who looks like she's on Stranger Things?" Next text, Maya Jama in Stranger Things makeup. So from a user perspective, there's nothing you can do. I don't understand the tech well enough to know what anybody else can do. Do you? I mean, you've looked deeply into AI, haven't you?
Well, look, I think the truth is that there are AI platforms that you could ask this thing of and they wouldn't do them because they have inbuilt safeguards and protections to make sure that it doesn't happen. Musk is motivated by what I would describe as a deeply nihilistic libertarian view of how the internet should operate, which he basically believes is arrogant enough to believe should basically be beyond the law and control of national governments. Honestly, I am really sick of hearing ministers or politicians of any type always, whenever something like this comes up, throw this to regulatory bodies or whatever. This is not a matter for Ofcom. This is a matter ultimately for Parliament and for government. It is a complete cop-out to start talking about Ofcom and this, that and the other. I heard Liz Kendall make a statement the other day saying, I'll back Ofcom to the hilt on this if they want. Ofcom is it's not unaccountable, but it is not an elected body. If Parliament and ministers think something should be done about this, then they should have the guts to do it. And ultimately, Ian, just on a point of raw politics, if you don't think, I know, look, there are concerns about Musk, he's a powerful individual and so on, and about relations with the US government, but if you don't think that you can win a political battle by drawing a line in the sand, by going, you know what, we as a government are going to say that we are not going to allow children or women to be for AI to be used to make naked images of them or put them in sexualized positions, then what political battle on earth do you think you can win?
We have bred a class of politicians that don't seem to understand that the role of a politician is to be a politician.
Indeed.
Not to hive things off to agencies or regulators.
Use the power you've been given.
Exactly.
They do what you tell them to do.
This is a big argument in the Republic of Ireland at the moment because they've gone down this route. I blame John Major for this. He started it in the 1990s. Ali?
I think Lewis is right on this. I mean, it is a complete cop-out. Politicians should actually lead. They should be much, much more direct. Look, I was listening to a conversation with Mustafa Suleiman, who's one of the founders of DeepMind. He's now gone to Microsoft AI. He was talking about the fact that in his institution, I don't know enough about this, whether it's true or not, but according to him, they have very, very deep questions about ethics within their company, and they're driven much more by ethics than some people within the Valley. Now, if it's going to be a free-for-all, one thing that people can do, and yes, it's up to politicians to clamp down on this stuff and regulate if they want to. I think that regulation has to be balanced as well, because you can regulate things out of existence as well. So there's a bit of a balance. People can start themselves by walking away from the app. Don't use the app. Go and use something else.
I don't know if that's good enough, though, Ali, because ultimately, even if you don't use the app, those images of those women and the girls or whatever will continue to be used. So I just don't know. Look, and the thing is, what scares me about this, or worries me about this, is that we're just the foothills of this stuff, right? These sorts of regulatory questions about AI are going to become manifest day in, day out. And so it will not be adequate for ministers to turn around and simply say, this is a matter for Ofcom, because we will see that the electors will want answers and action.
This conversation reminds me a bit about the online safety bill conversation, in which you had the libertarians arguing against those who want the protectionists, let's say. If it's legal, it may be harmful. Yeah. If it's harmful, it may be legal. Things can be both. And I think that they've just got to bite the bullet and decide if this stuff is illegal, and it's therefore it is criminal if it shows children. But even if they are invented children, fictional children, is this still illegal? They have got to grip this. They've got to look at it, and they've got to do something themselves.
Be legislators.
It can't just be that Information Commissioner's Office talking to Ofcom. This has got to be Parliament doing something, serious to do with X. Because I think the main area, the main cesspit for this is allegedly X.
Ian in Birmingham says, I love Lewis Goodall so much. He's an absolute legend. Other presenters are available
as well. He says legend in Birmingham. It's like being big in Japan.
Oh, I see.
What? I'll take that, Rachel, to be honest.
I'm not big anywhere.
8:49.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents,
we will be talking about that fatal shooting in Minnesota. How can it be that both sides rush to judgment straight away before waiting for a single bit of evidence? And is more violence exactly what Donald Trump wants?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:51 is the time. Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Sheila Fogarty and Ali Mirage are with us answering your questions. Here's one from Mo in Camden. Is the idea of sending British troops to Ukraine anything other than a good way of making sure we end up at war with Russia? Ali Mirage.
Well, I do think that we need to be very clear about what the task of those troops is going to be, and if indeed...
to keep the peace, presumably.
Well, if there is a peace to keep. And frankly, if you look back at why Putin made this incursion into Ukraine, I mean, there are lots of reasons. Yes, he wants territory. One of the other reasons was that he gave very explicitly back to 2008 to the Munich Security Conference was, I don't want NATO on my doorstep. Now, if we're living in a world where Trump has just invaded Venezuela because he doesn't want any foreign powers in the Western Hemisphere, and you think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, I was making these same arguments almost 4 years ago when this thing happened, and I was called a Putin apologist. I mean, maybe people are now starting to wake up into the real world, and when you have great powers bumping up against each other, it is not a sensible thing. And before someone tells me that NATO is a defensive alliance, I will cite three things to you. Serbia, Kosovo, and Libya as well. So it's purely a defensive.
Well, hang on a minute. I mean, each of those, you can argue that was a defensive.
Yeah, but if you're looking for, fine, you could, because it's saving lives and there was ethnic cleansing going on. I understand, right? I'm not saying that it shouldn't have happened. All I'm saying is if you're sitting as Putin, as a dictator, which he is, and he wants to acquire land, he would argue that it's not defensive. Now, what does it mean for our troops?
But he's wrong.
It may be wrong. What does it mean for our troops? I think, honestly, if Britain and France are going to be putting troops there, the question I would have is this. Where are the Spanish? Where are the Italians? Where are the Irish? Why is it only us putting our soldiers in harm's way, potentially to be attacked? What for?
Can I address what you said there about Putin's reason being he doesn't want NATO on his doorstep? If he keeps a long swathe of the east, on the other side of it is potentially NATO on his doorstep. If he takes over the whole of Ukraine, on the other side of it is definitely NATO on his doorstep. I think that's completely disingenuous from Putin.
Well, it might be, but I mean, look.
I mean, he brought NATO to his doorstep, what he did.
Well, I think respectfully, I would disagree, because NATO brought themselves to his doorstep by dangling the carrot of NATO membership to Ukraine and EU membership for years, and a bit like dating a girl and never asking her to marry you. That's exactly what happened.
Ali, shouldn't Ukraine have a right to determine its own future? It's not up to Vladimir Putin.
No, it shouldn't. For the same reason that Venezuela doesn't have a right to determine its own future.
Well, it does have a right.
Well, the thing is, you can, but then you have to live in a world where you're dealing with serious, real-world issues where great powers should not be bumped up against. So, yes.
So in your world, Ali, Poland shouldn't have been allowed to join NATO. The Baltic states shouldn't have been allowed to join NATO.
People can do whatever they want. In my view, defensive so-called alliances like NATO.
The Soviets didn't want Norway to join NATO.
Indeed.
And it was allowed to because Churchill and Attlee, and then Truman said, no, they will be allowed to join NATO. So in your world, they shouldn't have been allowed to.
People can do anything they want. And if there is a situation where Russia has incurred into Ukraine, people shouldn't be surprised that that's happened. And they shouldn't then quake when they're not prepared to actually take them on, including a tanker on the coast of the North Sea.
Let's bring Rachel in.
Well, I'm afraid, to me, that sounds like classic victim blaming. This time last year, I was heading out to, February was the third anniversary in 2023. It's about to be the fourth anniversary of a war that's gone on as long as the First World War. Western powers, if they really mean it, they should have given Ukraine the means to finish the job. I mean, if that was within the realm of possibility.
But they haven't, Rachel,
but they haven't. And I think putting these boots on the ground, signing bits of paper in Paris in front of placards that says Coalition of the Willing, is incredibly performative and it's high risk. I would much prefer to have seen the West, including NATO and the US, helped Zelensky force Putin out of the east of Ukraine.
Sheila, Ali's right, isn't he, when he says that it's no point just Britain and France forming this peacekeeping force. Where are all the other European countries?
Yeah, I agree.
We talk a lot about your Irish roots.
Don't blame me and my people.
Where is the Republic of Ireland in this? It has neutrality. And yet it makes pronouncements on Gaza, and it spends nothing on defence and expects us, the British, to protect them.
Well, I can't speak for the whole Irish population or the government, but I imagine that the government of the day, any government of the day recently, would point you to Irish peacekeeping forces in, for example, Lebanon. They would argue that they do.
But why are all these
bit.
countries not stepping forward here?
I would agree. Yeah, why not? I don't know why not, and they should be.
But let's be honest. I mean, look, irrespective of whether Ireland contributed or not, clearly it would not make the difference. I mean, what Ali's completely right about is two things. The plan that we saw put forward this week by Starmer and Macron or whatever, I mean, it's fanciful stuff. I mean, it's fanciful stuff for two reasons. One, that it's
NATO's
certainly
gone.
true to say that Putin, although I would think he had a completely jaundiced view of history, but nonetheless, given that Putin, in his own mind at least, believes that one of the reasons he's fighting this war is not just for territory. In fact, it's not primarily for territory. Actually, what it's really about, because he believes the quote root cause of the war is NATO encroachment. Now, I think that that's a complete sort of effrontery to the principles of self-determination. But given that he thinks that, why would he agree to have NATO forces literally in Ukraine
He's not
when
going
he
to
has
agree.
been exactly? So the entire idea, the premise of what Starmer and Macron have put forward is fanciful. And then the second thing, very briefly, is that even if you assume that for some reason Putin acceded to it, clearly the sheer numbers of troops that would be required would require an increase of defence spending on our part, on the French's part, so rapidly, so quickly as to make the entire thing.
Right, Ali, you've been slightly outnumbered on this, so final word to you.
Look, I think where Lewis and the rest can agree on this particular point, what's just been outlined by Lewis there. Just look at the troop numbers. 71,000 troops that we've got, 212,000 that the French have got. Russians, they've lost a lot in Ukraine. I don't know how many they've got now, but probably still 1 million. I mean, let's get serious about this. We should be having
a war economy. And
we should be having a conversation where we actually say we're going to, as a UK, going to play hardball. If we're going to be massively increasing our troop numbers and our defence spending, we should be extracting a better deal from the EU. Actually, right? Because we're not going to be taken for a ride by the EU. If you want our nuclear capability, you want our troops to be put in harm's way for you, we're going to extract more economic concessions from the EU. It's time to play hardball.
OK, Marita says there's a huge debate in Ireland at the moment about their neutrality. Zero coverage in the UK. Well, on this programme, there's been quite a bit of coverage of that, it has to be said. Right, our fun question comes from Roddy. I watched Lewis win Celebrity Mastermind over Christmas.
Well, bless you, Roddy.
Which other game shows would you love to have a go at? That's addressed to all of you, because I think there have been one or two other members of the panel who've done Celebrity Mastermind. Ali and I aren't considered celebrities, so we haven't.
Or masterminds.
I won it.
You won it? Your
Celebrity
special
Mastermind.
subject? Brilliant.
Pope John Paul II.
Oh, what a surprise.
Oh, there you go. I love the Pope.
A history of Irish neutrality.
I'm interested in the Pope's
Rachel,
and Irish neutrality.
you've been on it?
I've done it. I won it.
Yay!
With an obscure naval disaster in the Second World War.
Why?
Because I was considering writing a book about it, so I actually knew everything there was to know
Lewis,
about it.
what was your subject?
It was John Adams, The Life and Times.
And Ali, what would your subject be?
Probably Henry Kissinger.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good
I think so.
Right, so
What would yours be, Ian?
Margaret Thatcher, obviously.
That's the equivalent of my John Paul II, isn't it? Yeah.
What?
They liked each other.
So which other game shows would you like to have a go at that
Naked
you haven't
Attraction.
already been on? Naked Attraction.
Obviously.
The visual.
Are we past the watershed? No, almost.
Some of us would pay
That's
good money
not
to
a
watch
quiz
that.
show. It's not a quiz
Sheila?
show.
Okay.
No, game show.
Can I also
Game
say
show.
which ones I have done and been terrible at? Because
No,
I've
we
just
haven't got
bragged about
time.
Mastermind. Okay, super quick. Eggheads, terrible.
Yeah, I
Pointless,
failed at that.
terrible. I think that's it.
I
Can't
won.
remember now.
I won Pointless Celebrity.
Oh, well done. I was kicked out very early
Anyway,
on.
what would you like to do?
I really want to go on. I'm not really a celebrity, I don't think, but I'll just claim to be one for this. I want to be on Celebrity Traitors.
Well, I've never watched it, but I would watch it if you were on it.
I'd definitely
Rachel.
watch it. I'd like to do Celebrity Bake Off. Is that a quiz show? That's not a quiz
It's
show.
a game show.
I've done
It's
the
a
quiz.
game show,
I've
yeah.
done the chase and I've done Pointless Celebrities. I won it once and then I crashed out first round.
And
So
you
did I.
You did Big Brother, didn't you? With Anne Widdecombe and
Can't remember.
what
Long
was
time
the?
ago.
I can't remember her name.
Ashley James.
No. Anyway.
Never mind.
You did a great one on etiquette, Rachel, I remember. And it wasn't a game show as such, it was a programme about etiquette, and you turned to open a door the right way and the handle fell off.
I love Ian and Sheila are telling Rachel the things that she's done. She has no clue what it is.
It's all the blessed sponge of amnesia.
Come on, Ali.
I was going to say the traitors as well. However, I did spend quite a lot of time in the Tory party, so I think I've already sort of done the traitors already in real life. I would like to quite do a version of University Challenge with all of you.
Oh, yeah, I've done
That would be good.
Done that.
One at a come on, you're all presenters, you know, one at a time. But
Durham
we've
University,
sadly,
I'm available.
we've sadly finished finished the hour. In fact, we've gone over the time of the hour, which is a sacking offence. But thank you all very much. Really enjoyed it. I think, judging from the reaction, the audience did as well. Now, on Monday's panel on question, included in the panel is Conservative Shadow Minister Andrew Bowie and the barrister and broadcaster Hashi Mohammed. Coming up in the next hour here on LBC, we're going to return to the subject of fat jabs, because research out today shows that 80% of people who give them up put on weight faster than they would have done had they done an ordinary diet. I can't quite see why this is surprising to anybody, but it apparently is. I was told by my pharmacy today that I couldn't get any Manjaro anymore because they've exceeded their quota. Is there a problem with the supply of some of these jabs because so many people are using them? I want to know what's happened to you when you've stopped using one of these jabs. Have you just automatically put the weight on, or your stomach has become disciplined enough to make sure that you don't?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government's going to look again at plans to hike business rates for pubs that were announced in the budget. It's understood the U-turn will be announced within days after an outcry from the hospitality sector. Michelin star-winning chef Tom Kerridge owns a number of pubs and restaurants and told LBC he appreciates the government is listening and highlighted the business secretary.
It was Peter Carl's conversation with him in the first place, where he presented my business rates to me. He showed me what I will be paying, which meant that they were looking at it in Westminster. It meant that they were trying to pay attention and beginning to understand, I think, and possibly try and undo the wrongs that they put in place from that budget.
The Met Office says there's a danger to life as it issued a red weather warning for stormy winds in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. Winds of 99 miles per hour have already been recorded. 40,000 properties are now without power in Cornwall. Alerts for snow are in place for the Midlands and parts of Wales. Birmingham Airport suspended flights tonight. Well, LBC's Midlands correspondent George Ike has more.
In a statement, the airport says that because of heavy snow, runway operations have been suspended. They're asking passengers that are due to travel to contact their airline to check the status of their flight. And they said that this is all because the safety of colleagues and customers is their number one priority, and this decision has been made with that in mind.
Russia says any troops sent to Ukraine by the so-called Coalition of the Willing would be legitimate combat targets. It's after the UK and France announced plans to deploy forces there in the event of a ceasefire. Moscow's called the deal an escalation and claims an axis of war is being formed. A former Premier League referee who had a sexual video of a 15-year-old in his school uniform on his laptop has been spared jail. David Coote had previously admitted making an indecent image of a child. He's been handed a suspended sentence. And the US Senate has voted 52 to 47 to advance a resolution that would block military action against Venezuela without congressional authorization. Last weekend, US troops captured the Venezuelan president and brought him to New York to face charges. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 3 points at 10,044. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather: severe gale force winds for the far southwest tonight. Heavy snow for Wales and central England. A low of -5. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 5 minutes past 9 on LBC. Now, I want to talk about weight loss jabs because we have done this on a few occasions, partly, I suppose, because I'm on one myself, so I can actually bring a little bit of personal experience into the discussion. But when I saw this story today about the fact that weight loss drugs might need to be continued for life to keep obesity under control, I thought, no, that is a really good discussion because I've been prescribed these weight loss drugs, but I'm on Manjaro to help control my diabetes. It's not actually to lose weight. Now, I have lost some weight, not as much as I thought I would, I must admit, but I've lost nearly a stone so far. And I don't want to go down too much more, because I know if I do, I look at my neck looks scraggy, and being obviously a vain presenter, obviously I don't want that. So it's really to help keep my blood sugars under control, and it's worked brilliantly in that for the 3 months before I started on it in September, my blood sugars were in the green zone, under control, probably 30 or 40% of the time. Since I've been on Mounjaro, it's more like 70 to 80% of the time. So they've really helped me. That has obviously helped with the weight as well. So I was very interested to read this conclusion from this report, saying that you may need to stay on it for all of your life to keep the effects. Now, I'd thought that I probably would do, and once I'd finished losing enough weight, I would go down to the minimum dose of 2.5 milligrams, just to sort of, excuse me, just to keep it ticking along. And that's really, I suppose, been endorsed by this study. About 2 million British adults have used these jabs in the last year, and the overwhelming majority are paying privately. And Ricky in Leamington Spa is questioning why I'm not. He says, Iain, surely you could afford to pay for it privately like the rest of us who can't get it prescribed on the NHS. Well, you're absolutely right, Ricky, and I did volunteer to do that. I said to the diabetes nurse, well, I'm very happy to pay for it. And she said, no, you're entitled to it on the NHS, so I'm going to prescribe it to you. Now, I suppose I could have fought her and said, no. But then I thought to myself, well, I've been paying into the NHS for the last, 40 years, probably more than that. So why shouldn't I be prescribed it? But I take your point, and I'm sure there'll be many people who agree with you that I probably should be paying for it. But the fact is that when I got sent in my repeat prescription on Tuesday, the pharmacy rang up and said, well, we've exceeded our quota, so we may not be able to supply it by Saturday. Now, as it turns out, I got a phone call this afternoon to say they would. But I wonder if there is a shortage. If you've got any insight into that, I'd like to hear. But the main question I want to ask you is this. If you have given up or if you've stopped using one of these jabs, whether it's Mounjaro, Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever, if you've stopped, what has been the effect? Have you immediately started to put on weight again? And the conclusion of this report, I think, is that you actually put on weight 4 times faster than if you'd actually just stopped a normal diet. Now, Sheila was telling me just before she left the studio after Cross Question that when she did her phone in on this afternoon, the overwhelming majority of people said, no, I didn't put on weight because my stomach had become educated to expect less. Now, I don't know whether that would work in the long term or whether that was just the first few months. And maybe there is a sort of a trail off in the effectiveness of it, but it does sort of last for a few months after you've stopped taking it. I don't know that. You tell me. So what if you have stopped taking one of these jabs, what has happened? 0345 6060 973. And if you have started putting weight back on, what was the point of doing it in the first place? Now, I accept that there are many people, and I've got a couple of friends who've literally lost 7 or 8 stone using one of these jabs, and it's been an absolutely miracle for them. But if they then put back a couple of stone, you could say, well, it was still worth doing it, but not if you put back the whole 7 or 8 stone that you've lost. Jane Deville-Armand joins me, President of the British Obesity Society. He's also an independent nurse consultant. Jane, thank you for joining us. Take us through what the conclusions of this report, and do you disagree with any of the conclusions?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, I've been working in obesity for kind of 30 years, and one of the most difficult things about losing weight is keeping it off, no matter how you lose it, really. Whether you lose it from a diet or whether you go on shakes or whether you go on these extreme diets or whether you take, any of these GLP-1s. I mean, the thing with the GLP-1, and by the way, congratulations on losing a stone, is that it obviously enhances satiety so you don't feel hungry. So you literally... I mean, I don't know whether it's working on you because obviously the dose you're probably taking is probably less than the dose someone would be taking to lose weight.
Yeah.
But the reality is that lots of people go on it and they literally don't feel hungry. So they reduce their intake. They're going from 3,000 calories to like 400 calories. And of course, they lose weight very quickly, don't they? They lose muscle mass and they lose weight very quickly. Now, the minute you come off that, you're going to go back to exactly how you were before and feel as hungry as you were before. The idea is that you start to educate yourself to eat more healthily, and you start eating more healthy foods and things. But of course, a lot of people, I work with people who are on it, and because they don't feel very hungry, what they tend to do is they'll just eat a Mars bar, half a Mars bar. They won't eat a meal. They'll just eat a cake because they like cakes, and they don't, And the whole idea of going on something like this is to re-educate yourself into eating a better diet.
But isn't that the point of any diet?
Exactly, it is. That's why I'm saying I'm so surprised that people think that they're surprised that people put on weight quickly again. But the reason they put on 4 times as much is probably because they reduce their intake by 4 times more than you normally would if you went on a normal diet.
Right.
Like post-Christmas, I'm thinking I've put on half a stone, I'm going on holiday, I've started to eat sensibly, not eat any biscuits, crisps, sweets or anything like that. And, slowly I'll lose weight. And that's easy to maintain. But when you're on a Ozempic or any of these drugs, it literally, stops people feeling hungry. So they reduce their calories by massive, like a lot more than they would if they were on a normal diet.
But that in itself isn't healthy, is it? I mean, if you go down from an average male is supposed to have about 2,500 calories a day, isn't it?
No. I think they've changed that to 2,000 for everybody. They say 2,500, but that is only for someone maybe 21 who's really fit and healthy. Unfortunately, I don't know how old you are, Iain, but
63.
Okay, well, the older you get...
To which you're supposed to say you don't look it, but you didn't.
You don't look 63. But the older you get, the less calories you need. And unfortunately, we don't ever take that into account, But most men of 63, your basal metabolic rate, so your resting metabolic rate, you probably only need 1,500 calories to stay exactly as you are.
Let's leave my metabolics out of this, if you don't mind. But I'll come back to the point, though. Okay, say 1,500, but you reduce it to 400. I mean, that's not sustainable, is it? Because you are going to feel very, very tired all the time if you do that.
Exactly. And also you lose a lot of muscle mass. So, I spot people and I work with people who are on these drugs, and they look incredible. You can tell they lose weight very, very quickly. They lose muscle out the face. You can see they often look quite skeletal. They lose a lot of muscle, and muscle, of course, burns up energy more effectively than fat does. So if you've got a lot of muscle, when you eat calories, your muscle will burn those calories and get rid of them much more easily than fat. So the other thing is, Iain, a lot of people don't realise this, is that your body has a set point weight. So whatever your top weight has been, so if you're, I don't know, let's say you're 14 stone, right, and you get down to... I know, I was just being kind there. But if you come down to 12 stone, your body will, for the next few years, will be trying to get back to 14 stone, because it's got like it's inset into our bodies to stop us starving. And obviously this is thousands of years of, our development. So when you start to not eat food, your body thinks, oh, hang on, Ian's not eating anything. The minute you eat something, it's going to store that as fat because it thinks you might not eat anything tomorrow. So your body will constantly try and get back up to that set weight. So that's kind of really tough for people.
So the main advice to people who come off any of these jabs is to keep the discipline. And don't let yourself be don't go back to your old ways. But I mean, that's easier said than done, isn't it?
Because leptin and ghrelin, like ghrelin is like a hunger hormone. You're constantly, it's like a gremlin in your body saying, I need to eat, I need to eat, I need to eat. And it's really hard to switch it off. And you know that lots of people who are on these GLP-1s, they are, Ozempic and all the rest, they're constantly saying that it stops the food noise. They no longer wake up in the morning and they're planning their meals, and the minute they come off it, that'll come back again. We're surrounded by. I mean, I must say as well, we're surrounded by foods like ultra processed foods that really aren't good for us.
Yeah.
They're addictive. You know, the minute you have an ultra-processed meal, like your body wants another one, you know, they're very, very addictive. They're full of things that will make you want more.
And it's also interesting that this week M&S have launched this range specifically for people who are taking these fat jabs, sort of high in protein, high in fibre, which I haven't sampled yet, but I might buy one when I'm on the way home tonight.
Because that's the other thing, you know, when you're on it and you don't eat enough fibre, obviously you need to drink lots of water because you're hardly eating anything. You get constipated and all sorts of other, you know, bloating and all sorts of other things that might happen.
Well, you either get constipated or, how can I put this, the opposite.
Yeah, or the opposite. Yeah, exactly. because it does impact on your stomach. And you know, at the end of the day, it's a drug. It's fairly new. I mean, I know it's been around 6 or 7 years now, but it's still a fairly new drug. We don't know what the long-term implications are. And, you know, it's an aid. I mean, I think you're only licensed to have it for 2 years anyway on the NHS. But the other thing as well, you are entitled to have it on the NHS, Ian, because you're a type 2 diabetic and it's not just for weight loss. You're doing it for something else. A lot of people who are paying for it are paying for the drug, you know, one of the other ones that helps them lose weight, and they won't get that on the NHS yet.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. That's Jane Deville-Armand, President of the British Obesity Society. We'll come to your calls next. 0345 6060 973. What's been your experience of coming off these weight loss drugs? For whatever reason, whether you just decided you'd had enough, but you couldn't cope with some of the side effects, because the side effects affect different people in different ways. I can't say I've had any really bad side effects since I've gone up from 2.5 to 5 to 7.5. I will admit that, shall we say, there have been consequences, how can I put this, down below. Back down below, not front. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 9.
LBC. Dale on LBC.
19 minutes past 9. Dale says, I've always said weight loss jabs laugh in the face of our so-called meritocracy and are a symptom of a two-tier healthcare. It's not healthy if it doesn't change eating habits. Well, they do change eating habits. How do they think that they got fat in the first place? I'm still on my weight loss journey and diet is still the hardest part of it. Exercise is the best way to offset a rubbish diet, in my view. Well, look, I don't disagree with that last bit. I think exercise absolutely is part of it. This is from Jane. It's absolutely no surprise, read the fat jab news. The whole success of them is to reduce appetite. If you lose the weight without them, you regain the weight, as it's miserable fighting food noise and perceived in your head hunger. But if you were to lose all the weight you need and then take a fat jab maintenance dose, you'd probably maintain the lost weight. But that isn't allowed. So it's obvious even more that if you've curbed your appetite and calories through the drugs and you stop, well, what does anyone expect to happen? Injections treat obesity, which is complex. If you withdraw the use of all sorts of drugs, then surely whatever you're no longer treating will return. If I stop taking my statins, my cholesterol will go back up. Really, this is just stating the bleeping obvious. Well saved there, Jane. Thank you very much. Connor is a new caller in Wallington. Hello, Connor.
Oh, hiya.
Hi, what would you like to say?
So I was taking Wegovy from, I think, July 2023 until about February 24, so 7 or 8 months or so. And it was just really to get through. I've always struggled with my weight, and I just kept hitting like a plateau of around between 14 and 15 stone. I think I was still considered as overweight at that point. And it just was absolutely amazing for me. Like, I got it privately. But it just really allowed me to push through that barrier. And now I'm sitting at a pretty healthy 11 stone. And I've been maintaining it absolutely fine. I mean, I do count my calories like every day pretty much still. I do exercise and work out throughout the week. So I think it's a complete change of mindset. And so, yeah, I'm not sure what the data is on people regaining the weight faster and things. But I think if you completely change your mindset and your eating habits and everything that you do, you can quite easily keep it off.
What were you when you started?
I think I was like probably like around 15 or 15 and a half, because I'd already lost some weight. I mean, my heaviest was 22 stone, so I'd already been through the whole journey.
So you've actually lost half of your maximum body weight?
Yeah, I have, but that's not because of Wegovy. I've done it kind of, if you will, the hard way. You know, I did dieting, Weight Watchers, all that kind of stuff, and mainly just through nutrition as opposed to exercise. And I'd been up and down. I probably lost and gained close to like 20 stone throughout my life, and I'm only 27, or 26 even.
And what was your BMI at the worst point, and what is it now?
I don't know what my BMI was when I was 20 stone, but to be fair, I can't remember what it is now, but it's definitely within healthy range. I don't check it too often, at least for my height and everything.
So what's your one bit of advice to anybody who's about to come off one of these jabs?
Well, I think, while I was on the jab, I was counting all of my food, my calories, increasing my protein intake, all of that kind of jazz. So I suppose not everyone is doing that, but it completely helps you change your mindset. And if you're, making sure you're eating healthy, you're meeting your calorie goals, you're meeting your protein goals, you don't have to do heavy exercise, but just you're being conscious of how you're living your life in a more healthy way. I think at least for me, it was relatively easy to keep the weight off, but that's obviously not the same for everyone, I guess.
And how does it make you feel about yourself mentally? Because I can imagine, and look, I've been quite large at various points in my life, and I always feel bad. It does affect your mental health in most cases, I think. And when you have gone down to a weight that you're happy with, it must make you feel just much more positive about things.
Oh, definitely. Like, my life is so much better. Like, my outlook and my mental health is so much better. I mean, I've always been a much larger person throughout my entire life, from the earliest I can remember of my age. Like, throughout all of school, I was always really big and all that kind of stuff. So to finally get to this point in my life where I have complete control and a joyous mindset, and I have control over what I'm doing and what I'm eating, and I can still have the things that I want to have. That's the thing. You don't have to cut everything out, but it's all kind of in moderation. And, when you might have a bad day here, have a better day there, and make up for it and average it. Because, as you said, my whole viewpoint on myself, even now it's not the best, but it is a whole lot better than what it used to be. And now I can it sounds weird, but I can kind of live life as if I was kind of like not 18 again, but I feel like I can kind of live my younger years a bit better, because while all of my friends would go out and like not worry about things, like now I feel like I'm not thinking about what I'm doing consciously. I'm more excited to go out and do things. I wouldn't go to events, or I wouldn't go to certain places in London with friends of mine, because I didn't think that there would be, say we went to an ice bar, like I didn't think they would have a coat that would fit me. it's silly things like that. Whereas now, like, it's just all those kinds of things, activities, etc., are just so much more achievable, like, and I want to do them,
Yeah. Connor, thank you very much. Let's take a text from John, who says, my wife is on a weight loss drug. It's not a magic bullet on its own. Apparently it's part of a diet and lifestyle change. If you don't change your diet and lifestyle with it, you will probably put the weight back on. She's been told that by medical professionals. And that is sensible advice, isn't it? I think, do we need to be told that? I would have thought it was actually relatively obvious, but I suppose the more it's driven home, the better. Let's go to Anne in Leicester. Anne, hello.
Hello, Ian. I don't know whether you remember last time we were talking about Mounjaro. We had a slight detour in the conversation where you were saying that how it had affected my love life, which I think can you remember that?
I couldn't forget that, Anne. It was one of those radio moments, wasn't it?
Well, I started on Mounjaro a year ago, and I took 5 doses, 5 months, and I mainly kept it at a lower dose. And I went swimming, and I completely changed my diet quite a lot, because I've got a very, very high pressure job, and I was eating healthy stuff, but I was eating too much, and I had to make myself eat, and I made myself. And one of the good things about it is because you're not very hungry. What I did was I chose my diet and what I bought, so I ate really, really healthily. So I ended up had 5 doses, but you know how they always leave a little bit in the bottom?
Yeah.
So what I then did, I microdosed in the sense of you can get sterile syringes, healthy syringes, having worked in sort of medical labs and things. I knew how they worked. And I took a smaller dose, and then that weaned me off for 3 months. And by the end of it, I'd lost just under 4 stone. Which was great, because it was less than I'd been for like 15 years, and felt, and been going to the swimming and everything, so I felt really good, and everybody really, really noticed a difference, and that was great. And so I think that was about October. And first 2 months, really until December and the weather getting rubbish, I actually was really good and didn't really put very much on at all. But I've just weighed myself because you've just come online. And I
feel I need to have a Nick Abbott drum roll here.
Well, I've put on 7.5 kilos since, so I put on about a stone. Having lost 4, but I think half of that was Christmas. But I'm still swimming, and I'm still doing lots of healthy things. But what I'm considering doing is buying another month's worth and then doing the same thing and keeping a much, much lower dose. Because actually, I don't really have huge hunger pains. I'm not being really, really bad. But you just need that little bit to, stop you being a bit naughtier than you should be.
So my plan of eventually just going back down to the lowest dose of 2.5 just to keep helping the blood sugars, you think that's probably a good thing?
Definitely for you, but you've got to remember that people that are, that's still £150 a month or whatever it is. And I'm saying that if you buy a month's dose and you keep it, because it's the regularity. I don't know whether you know about half-life, but basically it comes out of your blood. It halves in your bloodstream after 4 days, so you've got to take it consistently every week. Yeah. So if you took, say, half a dose or a quarter of a dose, I was taking a third of. So I think it's something like 3 meals, and I was taking a meal, and that stopped me when I was weaning off. That stopped me from being hungry, and then as long as you're doing all the other stuff, that's a really good way. So I think the trouble with the drug companies is, how much more expensive it is when you get to the higher doses. They always encourage you to go up. Well, actually, if you change your behaviour, you can stay on the lower dose, get no side effects, as long as you do the other good stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's very important. Louis, sorry. Anne,
you're not going to ask me any other.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't do that to you. And thank you very much indeed. Louis John in Crystal Palace says, please don't forget your amazing personal trainer and how that help led into fitness and how that can help others. I can call in if you like. Well, please do, Louis. We'd love to hear from you. That is a good point. In fact, when I get home tonight, I'm going to be posting a little video, which I mentioned on the programme the other day that I could do a 160 kilogram leg press at the gym. And some people thought I said I could lift 160 kilograms and I never said that at all. So we did a little video at the gym yesterday of me doing a leg press of 160 kilograms. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Twitter and follow me, you'll have the pleasure of seeing me in a West Ham kit doing 100. Oh, sorry, Tom's been sick there. Sorry about that, Tom. We'll come to more of your calls on your experience of what it's like to come off a weight loss jab in just a few moments' time. And we'll also be talking about the U-turn on pub rates, or apparent U-turn. Is it actually going to happen? It's 9:31. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
The government's going to look again at plans to hike business rates for pubs that were announced in the budget. It's understood a U-turn will be announced within days after an outcry from the hospitality sector. Birmingham's airports suspended flights because of heavy snow, while the Met Office says there's a danger to life as winds of 99 miles an hour have been recorded in the southwest. 40,000 properties are without power in Cornwall. And David Bowie's former childhood home is to be opened to the public. The singer lived in Bromley in southeast London for 12 years until the age of 20. LBC weather: severe gale force winds for the southwest tonight, heavy snow for Wales and central England, a low of -5.
This is LBC.
Hi, babe.
Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
9:33 on LBC. We're talking about weight loss jabs and what happens if you come off them. Rosie is in Ruislip. Hello, Rosie.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you. So I was on weight loss jabs. I was on Mounjaro for about 6 months, and I just had the absolute worst side effects ever. A little bit like how you described issues down there, and it was just, it was horrendous. You know, I'd be on like work calls and I'd have to just run, and I only lost 2 stone, and I was very overweight, and it just wasn't worth it. So I came off it after 6 months, and I definitely gained all of the weight back, if not more. And yeah, I think it was just such a waste of money for me. I did try Wegovy as well, and that didn't help. I mean, it didn't have the side effects that Mounjaro had.
Was it just that side effect, or was there more?
It was big time, like cloud fog. And yeah, no, that was the main one. When I first took the jab, I had a horrendous migraine and I was throwing up, and it was awful.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, as I went through it, and I went up to 10 milligram in the end, and I had to go back down to 7.5. And yeah, the symptoms were just awful, and it just wasn't worth it for not much weight loss. It just seemed to plateau. And I've always been a bigger girl when I was growing up. And then when I was at uni, I lost 4 stone in a couple of years just by getting really into nutrition and exercise, probably unhealthily. Like I was counting my calories, but way too low. I was doing about 5 hours of exercise a day and eating about 800 calories a day. Like it was But
5 hours?
Disorder. Yeah, I did 5 exercise classes a day. Like, it was very obsessive, verging on eating disorder. But obviously I lost so much weight, and every time I came home from university, everyone was like, "Oh my God, you look amazing." And so I kind of fed off that. And then I kind of did keep it off for a good few years, and then it started to creep up. And then in lockdown, I lost 3 stone in 3 months just by going back to what I knew, like counting calories, eating a lot of nutrition. I've always, since university, I've never really had a week where I haven't gone to the gym 3 to 5 times. Like, it's always just ingrained in me. That's just what I do. So it's not like an issue with effort, but the weight just comes back because the food noise comes back, and it's more, like now I'm off it, I'm back to counting calories, and it's thinking, okay, if I take 50 calories off here, then can I add 50 calories here? And it's just like constant noise and thinking about it, which that was the only benefit, I think, when I was on Manjaro, was that I didn't have to think about calories. So yeah, I don't regret doing Manjaro. I'm glad I tried it, but it's definitely all the weight's come back, and I'm back on it now for January.
But are you happier?
Am I happier? No. No, I think if I'd kept the weight off, yes, I would have been happier. But, to spend all of that money, because I did it all privately, to spend all of that money and then not even lose a pound, gain it back and more, it's quite frustrating. I feel a lot happier in myself now that I'm back to counting calories, because I know that's my sweet spot, and I know I lose weight that way. But it's clearly not sustainable, because I'm 32 now, and I've been doing it since I was 18, and I've been up and down. So, yeah, it's just, I guess, it's not even trying to change your mindset and trying to eat healthily, because I do eat very healthily, don't get takeaways, always home-cooked meals. But it's the portion control that, when you're on Manjaro, your brain kind of tells you that you're full, whereas, if you're not on Manjaro, you can just keep kind of eating. So yeah, it's funny because I listen to so many call-ins about weight loss jabs on LBC, and I'm always so jealous of everyone that says they've had the best time and they've lost, 4 stone, 5 stone, 6 stone. I've been on WhatsApp groups and everyone's losing so much weight, and I'm sat there like, what is wrong with me? But I don't know. I think. Well,
I must admit that I sympathise with that, because I've been on it since September, and although I'm still only on 7.5, and weight loss was not the primary motivation for me. Yeah. I was expecting to lose it a bit more quickly than I have, and there was. Over Christmas I put 5 pounds back on, but now I've lost 7. So it's sort of
that'll be water weight. Don't worry about that.
Oh, that's all right then. But do you do it? I mean, let me ask you a personal question. Do you want to lose weight because you're unhappy with the way that you look yourself? Do you want to lose weight because you want other people to think of you as a thinner person? And what's the prime motivation here?
I think it is aesthetics, because I know that I'm healthy. I go to the gym all the time. I ran a marathon. I'm very fit. It's not from a health perspective. I know that my visceral fat is super low. I know that inside I'm really, really healthy. So it's not a health thing. It is just an image thing. I want to look nice in photos. I want to be able to wear the clothes that I want to wear. Family. My family are obsessed with talking about weight and what they've eaten today and how much calories they've had, and it's all very obsessed about it. And I know that they're looking at me thinking, sorry, I thought you were supposed to be healthy, but you're really, but you don't look it. And it's really frustrating, because I feel like I don't look how my lifestyle should reflect, if that makes sense.
But do we not have to recognise that some of us are just naturally bigger built than others? And
I agree.
And we ought to embrace that.
I do agree. And I look at people who are bigger, and I think they're so beautiful. And I always say to my friends, like, no, it's not going to be in your gravestone, how fit you were or how thin you were. Like, no one actually cares about that. But I think it definitely just gets you down when you can't fit in your old clothes. And I think because I have been so fit, to the point where people were like messaging me all the time, like, how have you done it? Like, how have you got those abs? Like, what are you doing? What's your secret? I've had that. Yeah. And now no one's coming to me now saying, what's your secret? Even though I'm doing the same thing, but I'm just eating, like, I guess, bigger portions. Yeah, I mean, I've gone to so many doctors about it to try and understand like what's going on with my metabolism, because I feel like it's going backwards. But you are right. Like it's not about how you look, it's how you are on the inside. And that's what I kind of remind my family when they do make comments. I'm like, but I am healthy inside. But yeah,
Well,
it's hard.
You've got a fan. Simon has texted in saying, Iain, your caller sounds absolutely lovely. Good luck, Rosie. You've pulled Rosie.
That is so cute. Thank you.
Simon's just getting his coat. Thank you very much for a really, really good phone call. Thank you. Let's go to Henry in Oxford. Henry, hi.
Iain, I think you need to go up to the maximum dose. 7.5 isn't enough. It'll work much better. I've been on these jabs since they were sort of brought here, and as soon as I love them, and I find they help me. I try not to drink apart from Christmas and on holidays, and it really helps me not drink. It makes my mind clear. I don't lose masses of weight. I lose a stone or something, unlike these people who lose sort of 6 or 7 stone. But I just stop eating in between meals. I stop eating more than I should. I eat in a lot of restaurants all the time, so I'm careful about what I eat. And I love the stuff. But as soon as I stop, oh my God, 2 weeks later, I'm eating the children's biscuits. I'm stuffing my face. It's just horrible.
Some people would say that says more about you.
Yeah, no, it does.
Your utter lack of discipline, Henry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a vain little piggy as well. I just want to look good. And, but, I'm happy, and I'm happy to pay for it, and I'm happy to, I don't have any side effects, luckily. I love it. So I'm really, really pleased that these drugs have come along. And I think in the future, they will really help, things like the NHS, because they will stop people being so overweight. And when they're cheaper, they will be cheaper. People will have better access to them.
Yeah, but is it really worth taxpayers' money to subsidise these drugs when if you come off them, you just automatically go up to where you were?
But you don't come off them. That's the thing. You've got to realise they're for life. You don't come off. I take sertraline because I have a bit of anxiety. I don't come off it. If I come off it, I get anxious. So that's what the saved on people clogging up the NHS and bed space because they're overweight will be worth it.
I'm not sure. I hadn't 100% agree with you there, because I think the criteria for having it on the NHS, and it's all, you may say, well, it's all very well for you to say that you've got it, but you can't. It can't be prescribed to everyone that wants it in the end, because I think that's what some people are arguing now, that anyone that wants it should get it on the NHS because of the long-term benefit for the NHS. I don't really buy that.
Also, I think it makes people happy. I just think it's something you should give people. The prices will come down. If so many people are taking it, prices will reduce and it won't cost so much. I just think hand it out. It's great.
Okay, well, your line has gone a bit dodgy there, Henry, but thank you very much indeed. Matt says, yes, there is a shortage at the moment. I had to prescribe for one for my patients from another pharmacy today. Well, that's the experience I've had. I was told that my pharmacy had exceeded its quota. It sounds like a communist system, doesn't it? And therefore I couldn't get it. And I'm thinking, well, I'm supposed to take it every Saturday. What happens if I don't take it? I mean, obviously nothing terrible would happen, but there's a little point in being on this if you can't take it when you're supposed to. That's the same with any medication, I guess. Matt, thank you very much for that. And this is from Stephen. Are we wasting taxpayers' money on this drug? Would the money not be better spent on subsidising exercise and raising the revenue by taxing sugar more? Well, sugar is taxed. I think there are, under certain circumstances, I think there are people who get gym memberships subsidised. I'm not sure that's very extensive. But, it is all part of it, isn't it? Because I know I've been going to a gym with a personal trainer now for 2.5 years, and I know that I feel so much better in myself. And by the way, I am paying for that myself. Very expensive, but worth it. And I know it's not going to make you lose weight necessarily, but it does keep you healthy. It keeps you supple. And I think if you are in, shall we say, the third age of life, I think it is important. And in fact, it's really interesting. In the gym that I go to in Tunbridge Wells, it's not all the muscle Marys there. There are lots of people my age who go simply just to keep themselves a bit fit. They're never going to win a marathon or anything, but that's not really the point. And I think people who just think that gyms are all about weightlifters preening themselves, sort of showing off their muscles. There are some gyms like that, but they're not all like that. Stephen, thank you very much. 0345 6060 973. What's been your experience of coming off weight loss jabs? It's 9:45.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Henry Riley.
A lifeline for pubs as the government hint they'll look again at the planned business rate rise, plus the latest with Storm Goretti as winds of up to 99 miles an hour batter parts of the UK.
Henry Riley at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
9:48. Now, the Chancellor is due to U-turn on her controversial business rates raid, which has pushed pubs to the brink of collapse. Treasury officials say that work on rates revealed a bigger impact of the changes to business rates than previously thought. Dan Tomlinson, who's the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, I think one of the better ministers in government, has been working on the research, engaging with stakeholders and firms. Now, it's expected to include pub-specific help, including on licensing, regulation and, crucially, on the way the rates are calculated. And it comes after the Prime Minister told LBC earlier this week that they're looking at what further support might be possible to help firms. Now, earlier this evening, another of my LBC colleagues, Tom Swarbrick, spoke for the second time this week to the TV chef and pub owner Tom Kerridge, who explained that his warning to Tom a few days ago does seem to have helped to prompt this U-turn.
That interview, and thank you so much, LBC, and yourself for that support that I think made a lot of noise. It was picked up by lots of other areas in the press, and I think the more people that paid attention and listened, and your support of pubs has been absolutely fantastic and phenomenal, and it really has helped to make a difference. Although we still don't know yet what it is that they're proposing, the fact that it's making news that there is a proposed U-turn in some way, we welcome that. But that is also a little bit, that's not support. That's like saying a few months ago, we announced the budget, which meant, like, we know there's an industry that's in trouble. Here's the budget. We're actually going to punch you in the face. Now, a few weeks later, we're saying, actually, no, we won't punch you in the face, but we still know you're in trouble.
Yeah, so we're going to slap you instead. We'll gently slap you rather than thump you. Yeah.
Yeah, so whilst we fully welcome the business rates reduction and the understanding of understanding the issue the industry is on, it is the VAT push that we are looking for as an industry. So it means that they've not made it any worse than it is, but that doesn't make it any better.
Tom Kerridge there. Well, Andy Lennox joins me now, landlord of the Old Thatch pub in Wimborne in Dorset, whose pub was the first to join the campaign to ban Labour MPs from entering, and who's been planning a march of pub landlords in Westminster at the end of this month. Andy, very good evening to you. Are you still planning to carry out this march at the end of the month after today's news?
I think at the moment we still don't know any detail at all about what U-turn is being planned, and I think it's come off the back of everybody turning around and saying, actually, you know what, we're going to ramp up industrial action. We've always classified the UK Labour MP campaign as industrial action. You know, banning 404 people is the easiest way that we could possibly have got the attention of the Labour government, of which obviously we have. So yes, we're still planning stages of various different things, whether that's a national day of hospitality, a national pub day, whether that is a some kind of industrial action in Westminster. But obviously looking at the U-turn and looking at the detail first, but ultimately anything that doesn't include a VAT cut to 13% in line with Europe, as Tom was saying, and as in the clip you said, is not going to go far enough.
But some people would say that there are lots of sectors in the economy that are struggling at the moment, and I completely agree with you. I know hospitality is one of them, and pubs in particular. But there are other deserving causes as well. And of course, if the government goes, well, as far as you're suggesting they should, then there will be other people queuing up to say, well, can we have some of that, please, as well?
Well, if you can find another industry that generates 60 billion in taxation and employs 3 million people and is the third biggest employer in the UK that needs more help, it would be really interesting to know, because I think ultimately at the end of the day, when hospitality is thriving, you know that the rest of the nation is. And, we're the engine growth of the economy. And at some point, governments are going to have to realise that that is what is actually the case. When we're not doing well, the economy is not doing well. And if we want to grow our economy and get Britain back to work and back to doing what it does best, we need.
Oh, I think we may have lost you there. Alan, yeah, no, we'll have to leave that there. That's Andy Lennox there, landlord of the Old Thatch pub in Wimborne in Dorset. If you're in Dorset, go and pay a visit to the Thatch pub in Wimborne. Right, let's go back to weight loss jabs. Alan is a new caller in Acton. Hi, Alan.
Oh, good evening. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I was on the weight loss drugs from February, and from February to December, I lost 3 stones, and I was in the top Manjaro 15 mg. But come December, because of Christmas expenses, I couldn't afford to be on it.
Oh, Alan, I think we've lost you too. Don't know what's going on here. Have we lost Alan? Is he back?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. As I said, I was on the drugs Manjaro from February to December, and I ended up being on 15 mg. But come December, because of Christmas expenses, I couldn't afford to do the drugs in December. So I took a break, and I went back in January, just a couple of weeks ago, and I had put back on 0.5 stone in that 1 month. And when I restarted, they wouldn't put me on the 15 mg. They said for safety reasons I had to go back on 2.5.
Right.
So although I've been on it 2 weeks, I haven't lost anything yet.
So what in that month when you were off it, did you still try and eat a diet which would be the same as if you had been on it?
I tried, but I couldn't keep it up. I was tempted left, right, and centre, and so I didn't eat as much as I used to when I first started. Nowhere near that. I did eat more than when I came off it. So and I had a bit of alcohol as well. So, but yeah, I did put on half a stone, 8 pounds, So, but also I want to go back on it now, but they won't put me on the 15 mg.
No, and you can see why they would say that. Alan, thank you very much. Let's go to Rich in Solihull. Hello, Rich.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, I was a really early adopter. I've been on Manjaro for about 1.5 years. I took it initially. I play for bands, and we got booked to support some fairly famous bands. So I wanted to lose a bit of weight to look my best. So you could say it was for sort of vanity.
Go on, do a bit of name dropping.
Lightning Seeds.
I've heard of them. Yeah, like them.
Yeah. So that was the big motivator for me to lose some weight. And it worked. I mean, I lost like 6 inches off my waistline in about 4 months. Like that equated to about 3 stones. So I got down to about 12.5 stone, and then it was brilliant. It cured a load of other comorbidities that I had. I'd got sleep apnea and all sorts of stuff, and it was great. But I mean, latterly, sort of, 1.5 years on, I mean, I'm still down at that similar weight. But the moment I stop taking doing a weekly dose, I'm just like, my appetite is huge. The weight just goes back on instantly. And I hear people calling in tonight saying, I'm just maintaining a small dose, but I'm finding that if I take like a 2.5 milligram dose, it doesn't even touch the sides. I might as well not even waste the money putting it in. It has no effect whatsoever. I think it's sort of exponential. I think if you come off it, you almost, if you were taking, let's say, a 5 milligram dose, then you pretty much need to double that for it to have any sort of effect. So I bought a couple of pens before the price went up in September. And I've been using them sparingly, but honestly, my appetite is back, and it takes such a lot of willpower to stay off it.
Well, keep up the fight, Rich. It makes sense. Thank you very much indeed. Cos says, we had this chat on our gym group today. If you don't exercise and eat relatively sensibly when you come off the jabs, you will inevitably put weight back on. Well, I think that is the message from this hour, isn't it? We concluded it needs to be a lifestyle change and not a magic wand. Well, again, I think that's absolutely right. Michael says, please, please, please stop using the lazy jabs. It is terrible English. It is a weight loss injection. I think I'll use my own words. Thank you very much. I don't need any lectures on which words to use, Michael. I'm very grateful for your message, though. Thank you for all of your calls and messages this evening and throughout this week. I'm back on Monday evening from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. And download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Clive Bourne. But right now, in for Ben Kentish, it's the soon-to-appear on Cross Question, Henry Riley.
One of these days, invite lost in the post. Thank you, Ian. Good evening at 10 o'clock.
Although we still don't know what it is that they're proposing, the fact that it's making news that there is a proposed U-turn in some way, we welcome that.
Not another one, a U-turn from the government, this time on pubs with a support package being drawn up. How difficult is it to be in the hospitality sector at the moment? Plus,
children have been swearing or spitting or throwing furniture in a classroom space as well.